is being recorded, and again, relevant to this portion. So because it's Zoom, the files are too big. So we have to transfer them to our town's YouTube site. And there was just a disconnect in that. And it was really because we're all learning as we go. And so they're there up until November 5th.
They're also on the minutes. If you access the minutes up at the top, there's a link with the password. So those can be accessed from there too. So.
Okay, thank you. And the way this works is we do always welcome on a particular item, we'll welcome public comment. And I think tonight there will be some questions and comments from the public. But if you could indicate so, putting your name in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to get through to your questions. We're joined tonight by several guests, and I wish I could name all of you because you're all special in your own right. There are 11 commissioners here, or task force members, and I want to welcome all of you, but I also would like to point out that we have Trey from Fairfield Ubuntu. I see some of the students from our Fairfield Equity Group. I see State Representative Jen Leeper. I see, Mr. Whaley from the school. I see this is a bipartisan, multi-partisan. It's not just two. There are many unaffiliated voters. And I think it's important, again, germane to our discussion tonight. There are a few things that we can talk about throughout the course of the evening, but it's important for the group to know, the group at large, that we are, when I'm speaking, or any one of the individual task force members, we're speaking as individuals. We're not, unless expressed specifically, we're not representing the viewpoints of an entire group, because there are 11 of us. It would be, unless there's unanimous consent, it would be impossible for us to speak with each other. We have created in the past several months a safe space for difficult conversations. It has been thoughtful, productive, a great opportunity to have challenging discussions. And it's important for the group to know, this group to know, that we haven't always agreed. And that's what's brought us to a better place of understanding. And it's something I've said is, I'm not afraid of the difficult conversations. I'm afraid of not having them. And this space of the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force, and through the work that we've done on the Fairfield Equity Coalition, they have successfully, and I think our group has successfully fostered an environment where challenging conversations are the name of the game. I'm going to make a motion to move the discussion of the McKinley racism incident to move it down to item number 8, and to move therefore item number 5, 6, and 7 up to, there's probably a more articulate way to say that, but I'm going to move to flip item number 6 and item number 4, the discussion of the racism incident and the hiring process of the chief. I'm going to make that motion. Is there a second? And hopefully, Ryan, as you're taking notes, that made sense to you. So the motion is to flip item number 4 with item number 6. Is there a second to that motion?
I second it.
Sonia with the second. Thank you. Is there any discussion?
I thought we were moving 5 and 6.
Well, so my feeling is that the items work together. If you all feel differently, and I know that there was a feeling that it was really important for us to,
I feel like I don't want to move item 5 because they've done, that really is very germane to what we're talking about. I think that really gets to the heart of what we're doing. So I would be fine with moving item number 4, but yeah. So I think I don't want to move it.
I think the best way to do this, and I'm sure Attorney Baldwin would better advise, we could vote on the motion that's on the table and then make a new motion just to flip. Because I think what we're trying to get at is that, Attorney Baldwin, items 5 and 6 really bleed into what we're talking about with item 7. with you.
Nancy, why don't we just go ahead and vote on that motion?
Okay, so let's go ahead and vote. And I guess if you're not for that,
Can
vote
you
no.
repeat the motion?
To
So the
item,
motion is to move item number 4 to make it item number 7.
And then move
I
everything
second
else.
that motion.
That's fine. Yeah, that's good. So there was a second?
Second is Sonia.
motion, I believe on the table was to flip them.
Well, we want to,
Sorry, just to be, I'm just more aware of like the actual semantics because the town attorney is on the phone. But I think I think I had initially motioned to flip them, but I can revise. I think I'm allowed to revise the motion. Jim, can you weigh in? We're just trying to make this easier. We're just trying to.
Sure, it doesn't have to be too difficult. You can do whatever you want, Nancy, to make it happen as long as there's consensus and a vote. So you want
Okay.
to.
So let's move item, thank you. Again, we're trying to be on our legal best behavior because, you know, we've got eyes. So I'm going to amend the motion to be, let's move item number 4 and make it item number 7.
second.
If I would, Nancy, just because they're already identified by numbers, I think that you should not call it, make it item number 7, but rather just put it after item number 7. Because the agenda is listed as it is, and that can cause confusion.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any noes? Okay, so now, community members, you see the really exhilarating work of racial equity and justice, how this works. Gina, the next item on the agenda, again, being.
So our next item up is to hear and listen, consider and act on the next step of the deep listening project. And so for people on the call who are not familiar with our work, what we have been doing since we started in October is we have gone out into the community and had some very in-depth conversations that were, we had a procedure that we followed, and we asked the same questions around town, and we collected all the data. Sandra was very happy to be our collector, and we had a subcommittee who got together, read all of the responses from the town, and have put together a presentation for us about the results. So I'm going to introduce, I think, is it Karen? Are you the person who's going to do it? So Karen Lynch.
I'm going to start, and then I'll hand it off to Doug. And I will be sharing my screen, although the deck itself that we'll be going through was emailed to members of the task force, and I believe it's in the minutes, so it should be available for other people as well, right? Or was it attached to the agenda? I'm not 100%.
Yeah, it was.
All right, so now let me make sure I can share my screen.
I see it.
You see it?
Yes.
All right, let me just rearrange stuff so I can actually see it myself. Okay. Okay, so again, we're presenting this now. I'd like to just kind of start off by reminding people that knew what our research process was, reminding them of that process. And for those of you who are new, kind of telling you a little bit about the process. We had outlined a few steps that would bring us to a place of understanding. And the very first of those steps in our kind of charge to listen to folks is what in the marketing research world and in social research is called qualitative research. It's listening. It's not quantifiable data, but it is kind of data from conversations that's more akin to understanding the whys and not trying to get statistically accurate information, but to, again, drive insights and development of kind of thoughts that will feed into other initiatives. So we did this, starting in November, and people on the task force were each charged with talking to folks within a different sector in town. Somebody talked to folks in education, for example. Some folks covered housing, some folks covered law enforcement, and we talked to key individuals in each of those areas. We have data, we have a kind of transcripts from 15 interviews. And by transcripts, I don't mean actual type transcripts of them. They're really just notes that the interviewees transcribed on their interviews. They were not recorded for confidentiality's sake, and we're not calling out anybody that we talked to by name in this deck. So we're talking a little bit more holistically, but for the people listening in, know that it was a combination of some people high up in those areas in terms of leadership, and some people a little bit further down, kind of in the weeds in each of those areas. Additionally, it's worth calling out that we've been doing some other things as well. And you'll see that right here on this deck. You know, Lynch, who's the president of the Fairfield Equity Coalition, spent some time with us talking to us about their initiatives and reviewing what they were going to be presenting to the Board of Education. And then Ken Barone, who is project manager for the Connecticut Racial Profiling Prohibition Project, came and spoke with us and presented us some data when it comes to kind of policing in our area, in our town and in our area, sharing with us a little bit about Fairfield's data and also how Fairfield's data compares to surrounding towns. So that was another brilliant presentation that we had. Additionally, and kind of the last order of business here is everybody on the call should know that the task force has been digging into other survey results, survey research that's been conducted by other equity groups in town, by benchmarking from other towns near us, talking to folks in Westport, for instance, and getting some of their data. So we've been doing this kind of secondary research to get information from other sources, in addition to reviewing town charters and documents, and also some historical departments, talking to folks, you know, who have a little bit more of an understanding of Fairfield's history. So I want you to understand that even though we've only been in, you know, kind of formed in the last few months, we've been rolling up our sleeves and digging really deep. The data that is to follow tonight is largely from the deep listening interviews. However, you have to keep in mind that the people on the task force have a new lens of understanding based on the work that we're doing. So the qualitative caveats are always that the way we talk to these people, we reached out to them one-on-one. It was very individual. It wasn't a scientific effort, so to speak. Qualitative research isn't expected to be. So they're not projectable. They are used as guidance, as direction, to give us insight, to give us fodder, and to inform future initiatives. So does anybody have any questions about qualitative research in general before we go on to what we heard?
There are no questions in the chat, and I think as we're moving, let's start with, if there are questions, we would start with members of the task force first, and then we can turn it to the public. So maybe let's get through the presentation.
Got it, yeah. And we're going to be going fairly quickly through this. We have some things that we have left out for discussion another time, because we know that we have a couple of other things to cover today. But what we did find is, in our conversations, is we do not have equity in town. We face some major hurdles. That's really the big picture. Racism exists on many levels. There are concerns that there's a lack of transparency about these issues within our kind of town's governing structure. There's also skepticism about our task force's ability to affect change. So those are kind of the three bullets of headline, guys. This is what we're finding out. Two quotes that I want to kind of kick things off with before I hand it off to Doug for a little bit more of the granular information. One of the interviewees that we spoke to really prompted us to be a leader in the state. Fairfield needs to be proactive. So it validated some of the efforts that we are having and some of the conversations that we're having. A proactive approach is something that would be inspiring to folks in our town and in our community. And then an interviewee shared that there was very little confidence that the effort is going to yield a major shift, because the attitudes are ingrained and cannot change overnight. So a little bit of cynicism there as well. And I think those two things have to be understood, that while we have hope and you know, kind of an admiration for what we are hopefully able to accomplish, we also have some cynicism to whether or not we actually will be able to. And with that, Doug, if you could take over and talk through some of the other findings, I'll keep moving us along.
Right, thanks, Karen. And
Sure.
you know, thank you again for managing this process. And Ryan, thank you, and Sandra, you too. Just drilling down to the next layer down from that big take-home headline, we found in the course of our interviews, and remember our process here is to try to synthesize the various individual interview responses into some of the major themes. So we're going to lay out a couple of the sort of mid-level themes, and then you'll have available for your own review in the deck some of the more specific themes and topic areas that we want to focus on. Again, keeping in mind that the practical implication here is that we are driving these themes into the generation of survey question content. Like, so we want to make sure that our survey questions actually hit on these themes. So number one, most town leaders seem willing to have these difficult conversations. I think we regularly heard that people are aware of these issues. It is still a touchy, edgy topic
Ask
for
for
many
food?
people.
And some refill. Didn't Omi do some chili?
Sonia, you.
And that people are juggling many topics and issues as they're trying to deal with things.
I'm here.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Good. Residents' racial biases, known and unknown, and the touchiness of the subject were common themes. And the term white fragility had come up, that people are really on pins and needles as they address these issues. And certainly many people noted the homogeneous nature of the town, that Black and brown people stand out by just by walking in Fairfield. Skin color signifies that you may not be from Fairfield, and people absorb that perception and commented on it frequently. It seems that the status quo has worked in a town that's majority white. This is a well-known issue, and we've heard responses even after we closed the creation of this deck that this is certainly an issue. And if you don't, I think Nancy already said this, if you don't ask these questions, you don't give people a reason to talk about it, it's very easy not to talk about it in a majority white town. And there is a comment and a theme that the town's approach to racial issues and equity issues tends to be reactive, not proactive, that there's sort of a let's deal with the crisis, but not really dig into looking at the institutional and systemic issues that we really need to focus on. So I think we certainly, as we get to the blueprint, we'll be looking at long-term commitment to these issues and really making that a benchmark. People of color in Fairfield want to be heard. They want their stories recognized and validated. Even in a town where we think these may not be issues, if you lift the cover and start to give permission to people to talk about it, there's stuff going on here that is deeply troubling. We have the graffiti issue we'll talk about later. Students have been, as noted here, there are potential differences in the way discipline is handed out in the schools. A unique issue that I heard about was sort of determinations about how a property is designated as being in blight or not, and whether or not that may have racial and class and equity implications. So these are our citizens' lived experiences day in, day out. We really find that if we don't give people the opportunity to talk about it, it's not going to pop up. So. And then just more generally to close up on other themes, the intersection of racism and sexism and anti-Semitism and other biases is just unavoidable. We need to really be thinking in multiple dimensions about this. So educational issues arise because there are housing issues arise because of economics. So you can't just hit one issue and not have to dig deeper and pull the thread to understand how it intersects with other things. There is a fair amount of equity and diversity training going on in many of the town systems. So that's the good news. There are a number of barriers, time, resources, licensing and union requirements came up as an issue. And there is a perception, I think we're all familiar with it, that if you've done a workshop in equity and diversity training, that somehow that checks the box on these issues. And I think what we heard over and over again is that there's a need for the follow-up. What's the next step after you do some of the more didactic education or training? And as I alluded to, there are concerns about other marginalized groups in terms of just sexism and anti-Semitism.
Yeah. These next several slides, just so you know, we are not going to dig deep into all of them, but just know we talked and have some thoughts on Fairfield's administration, issues specific to education, issues specific to law enforcement, culture and history, So we have dug deep into all of those areas, but again, for the sake of time, we just know that they're here and this can be looked at. We're going to use some of that to drive future initiatives. And Doug, if you'd like to kind of cover what's here, that'd be great.
Yeah, so just again, quickly, because I know we have a lot else to talk about. From the very beginning, and I really credit Mr. Bogan for pushing us to this, we've been creating the blueprint as we've been working. The blueprint that we're charged to deliver is not something that we're going to write in the last moment. It's a living document right now. And part of our focus and the way we've synthesized all this is to start to develop blueprint suggestions. So we've listed some of them here. This is not exhaustive by any means, but these are some of the things that I'm reasonably confident that these things are going to make it into the final version whenever that's delivered. But this gives you a sense of where we're headed with some of these issues. So to create programming to raise awareness about these issues, really help people understand the value of diverse community for the whole community. This is not just serving the needs of a minority group. This would actually influence and improve the entire Fairfield community. We want to look at sort of the history of Fairfield and make sure we're reflecting the truth of what exists in our history. Specifically, there's a concern about the town seal that we want to be sure we address, and a tremendous focus over and over again on hiring. This is a ubiquitous, pervasive issue of just trying to figure out how we can make people want to come work in Fairfield, live in Fairfield, and recruit people who are not necessarily representative of the majority, but come in and sort of reflect the reality of what people are facing here in Fairfield. And then finally work in tandem with the town's ethics review committee to look at, I'm losing my slide due to a chat message, but just to look at issues of cultural diversity. So that's our quick summary of the work we've been doing. The next, we're going to talk, I know there's an agenda item.
Talk a little bit later about that.
We'll focus on that, but
yeah.
Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any
Thanks so
questions?
much.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to open the questions up first to the task force. Does anyone have any questions about what they'd read, or want the people who read the material to go over anything a little more?
No, it's the first that
Sorry
we've.
about that. Did I just talk to myself? Did you just hear me?
It's
Okay.
good. It's the first we've seen of it. I still have to digest it. I haven't, but it's a good start. Like, this is a work in progress, and this goes into one of the sections. It's a great start.
I think I'm wondering if, in general, if the report would benefit from some, we don't have to say who we spoke to, but sort of the categories of people we spoke to, I think might be beneficial, right? Because we didn't, I do think that, I know because I was in the process of how we figured this out, that we talked to a variety of types of people. And I'm not sure, I want to make sure that people understand that this is like, you didn't just speak to people of color. You didn't just, you know what I mean? That you really spoke to a cross section of people.
It's on page 1, Gina.
Yeah, I think Karen sort of highlighted that, right? The members conducted these interviews with culture history, right? Is that what you were looking for, Gina?
Yeah. I just, because it's going to live kind of by itself. Mm-hmm. And I think you talked a lot about the experiences of people of color, but I know just because I heard some of the calls, you didn't always hear that from just people, like that's not who told you those stories. That was stories that you heard from a cross section of people in town. And I do think that is something that's important to say, that it isn't just people talking about their own experience, it's people that notice others' experiences as well,
And further to that, Gina, I think like in the instance where we talked to the police department, who've been very open with us, I think it's important to know that there's not just the police department, but in HR broadly. And again, without revealing, or if for the, for privacy's sake, not necessarily revealing the names, but I think it's important that we weren't just making observations about the police department. We weren't making observations about HR. We were actually taking input from the invested stakeholders within those various domains.
Yeah, from the top down.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And again, we know that because we were in the process of it, but I think it would benefit if we made sure that we said that explicitly.
I agree. That's important to emphasize that this was not just, there was an attempt to go broadly here and we speak to people both in leadership roles and frontline roles.
So maybe if you could stop sharing the screen for a moment so we could see if any of the other, Gina, if you want to ask the other task force members, and then open. You're on mute.
Sorry, any other task force members have any questions about the process or the document itself? I'd like to open it up to the community. If there's anyone who has any questions or comments about what we've been doing, or what this document is, please raise a hand or put in the chat.
And then we just will vote. If there are no questions, just kind of vote. We have to decide on next steps.
Right. So,
yeah.
So at this point, if I know that this subcommittee has been working really hard about this and I've had the opportunity to read it too. Do we want to make a motion to approve this document?
There's one hand raised.
Oh, sorry. I can't see.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. Just curious about are you able to quantify the anecdotals that you reportedly, could you hear me?
Just say your name.
Yes, we hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm hearing two voices at the same time.
She said your name, say your name, and then.
Yes, Beverly. My question is, I'm curious as to how many anecdotals did you receive? You said you spoke to many people. I just wanted to know if you're able to quantify that amount.
So there were more than 15 interviews. We did not get we have notes from 15 interviews. We'll leave that.
No, it said that it said the two things you said in that statement. One was the 15 different people from the various agencies, but then there's a portion in which you indicated that you had many anecdotals with town residents. And so I'm asking if you can quantify, meaning how many people about, what's the range? Was it 20 people? Was it 100 people? Just curious.
I can tell you it was not near 100. That would be my best guess. I believe that that's across the board, as all of us on the committee have had some of those conversations. So again, it's not necessarily a statistically projectable number. It's more individuals having conversations with people. So I don't know that we have tallied random conversations that we've had in answer to that question.
I don't think we can quantify this at all. I don't think we can quantify it at all.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So just the goal of the deep listening project is, at this point, was to gather information so that we could put out a townwide survey. I think it's important to say that.
Yeah, the objective there, great point, Steve. The objective of this was to start the conversations so that we could feed a survey that would be a quantifiable effort, and then also form a plan to have more in-depth conversations with certain groups that were deemed necessary to look into again. So that was the intention of the deep listening, was to start, was not to be comprehensive and conclusive.
But to that end, we targeted people who spoke to a lot of people. So it wasn't just, calling my next door neighbor. It was speaking to someone at the police department who could speak about their role at the police department, speaking to someone at the Board of Ed who could talk about the Board of Ed more broadly. So it was really about targeting enough different community groups. And I think that was, if you go back in our minutes, we actually went through kind of how we were going to select the different groups, because we wanted to make sure that we had reached all of the areas that people had communicated to us that they were interested in. So if someone said they were interested in housing, we then took it upon ourselves to talk to someone in a position where they could talk about housing.
Leadership,
makes sense.
talk to leadership in those categories.
Thank you.
And we plan on going deeper. You know, we have another year in, on the task force. So this was a start. We were gathering information, put out a townwide survey, keep the deep listening going, deeper as the year goes on.
Again, with the goal of presenting a blueprint. There is a question in the chat, how will the task force distribute the survey? And I think it's a pretty simple answer, but if anyone else on the town wants, or on the task force wants to chime in, basically through leveraging our various networks, through the stakeholders that we spoke to, the community leaders, the different interviewees that we met with, hopefully through town mechanisms, links to it,
Right.
Social media. So we haven't formulated an exact plan, but we've talked about, leveraging our various networks and amplifying out. But if someone else wants to weigh in on that.
I would just add, we're wide open to suggestions about novel ways to disseminate this. And we've been trying to stay aware that we have ideas about where to go. And that means we're probably missing people, that we're missing groups. So
Right.
we're open to suggestions on how we can get this to people who might not naturally, show up on our lists.
So we have a comment from Max, who says, sounds like a great start. Thanks for your work in 3 to 4 short months. Thank you, Max. Thank you to the committee. We have some rock stars on this committee, that's for sure. Thanks, John Whaley, who says it looks pretty thorough already. I'm not sure there's a lack of data for racial inequity. Yes, that is what we're finding, that Fairfield is exactly like everywhere else. Rob Smoller asks, when you did the deep listening, were there many people that didn't want to have the conversation at all? Anybody want to take that one?
I didn't find that. When I had my interviews, they were very happy to speak to me. So I didn't find that in my interviews.
Same here.
Same here.
I actually found people to be eager, hungry to talk about it. If you sort of create enough safety and sort of, address the concerns that are going to be judged or criticized, people want to talk about this stuff.
They do.
But, to that end, we're not afraid to talk to people who don't want to talk to us. That was the whole point. The point is we want to talk to lots of people, because at the end of the day, we try really hard not to be an echo chamber. I think one of the things that I am very proud of with this group is, even though we are people who have very, very different points of view, we can come together. We really have been able to figure that out. And so we have people who represent all sorts of opinions, and we'd be happy to talk to. If you know somebody who has a different opinion, let us know. We'll go talk to them. So I think that if we don't have any more comments or questions, the next move is to talk about what we want to do with this. Do we have a motion to?
Can I actually make a motion?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I make a motion that we defer acting on next steps for the deep listening project till we hear, consider, and act upon the entire task force next steps?
Yes.
I think it's all linked together. And I think we should go through perhaps the rest of the meeting before we put this particular thing in context.
Second.
So Karen made the motion, Steve seconded. Is there any discussion? So can we have a vote?
Aye.
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 Any nays? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Okay. So our next action is the update on the hiring process of the police chief. So at our last meeting, we found out about the police chief, and we discussed as a committee putting together a statement for our feelings about what we wanted to do as a task force about that hiring process. And so we drafted a letter requesting permission to, we asked for three things. We asked for transparency in the in how the candidates were determined. We asked to be included in the interview process, not as decision makers, because we recognize that the town charter does not allow that. We actually just asked to be part of the interview process and help come up with questions. And then we asked for transparency after the hire to find out how the decision, how racial justice and equity factored into the decision with the final hire. And that motion, our letter was not received well. We were told no to all of that. The new police chief is Bob Calamaris, and he's someone that we all know, and we actually don't have an opinion about that really, because it was never about the person. It was really about the process. And so in order to, and we really are, I think one thing that this task force, I think we can all agree on, is that Chief Liddy has been wonderful in terms of racial justice and equity. He's been open to us. He's been open to conversations. He's been very transparent. We've gotten a lot of information, and we had a good dialogue back and forth. And, we have a lot of hope that Chief Calamaris is going to continue in that same vein, because I think that in my conversations with Chief Liddy, he feels really passionately that listening to the community is what the police force is about. And so to that end, we really wanted to hear, the town attorney had some thoughts about the scope of our letter. And so we invited him here to kind of give the response. I forwarded it to the committee members already. They've all seen it. But I'm going to, if we don't have any other discussion from the committee. Sandra, did you want to say
Yeah,
something?
I just want to clarify one thing. I for all of the people who don't know, we had, it wasn't our last meeting. It was a special, kind of last minute meeting that we had Friday night at 4:00 to go through a letter that was sent to the police commission after that meeting, Friday at 5, before holiday weekend. Monday we had, was Martin Luther King Day, and Tuesday was the interviews for the finalists, the final candidates. So I feel like I don't want to present it as we sent this letter to them 2 weeks in advance of the interview process, and they got back to us and said, no, you can't be involved. We sent the letter very late in the process, and we sent the letter very late in the process. We had even discussed as a group, it's probably too late. And I feel that the article that came out, and I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but I feel like the article that came out this morning in the paper was a little misleading. And I have to say I'm a little upset by it, but.
What article are you referring to?
I'm talking about the article in the Patch.
One.
I'm sorry?
Which one are you referring to?
The one that says racial equity group denied role in police chief hiring process.
Okay.
It reads like we asked well in advance and we were told that we couldn't do it. And that's not, in fact, how it all went down. And I just think that we need to be as transparent as we're asking everybody else to be.
And it's
So-
Totally, fully agreed. And I think,
Tina,
I,
can I just make a comment?
sure.
Thank you. So while I understand that point of view, here's the situation. The reason we came in as late as we did is because we weren't aware, not this task team, but the community of Fairfield was not made aware of the process or engaged in the selection. So I'd like that to be reflected on the record. It's not that we were late, it's that we didn't know because it was not shared with us.
And that's fine, Sonia. I understand that as well. But I also think that the headline is that we were denied this. And I want everybody to know that there are reasons for both ways. We didn't know about it, but we also sent this in very late and late in the process.
Does that mean that we didn't know? If we sent it in ahead of time, we would have known. So the rationale behind that argument just doesn't apply. So I'll leave it at that, but I just want to make sure the voices are heard, right? Which is how to send something in ahead of time. No, not late. That's all.
Right.
Thank you.
So the question is, this is Steve, how long was the process going on? We don't know. We saw the resignation or the retirement in the paper on December 31st. So that was, when we saw that, that's when we initiated our process of trying to get involved in it. So that was basically 2 weeks ago. And it took us a week to get a letter out, to get everybody together. And so, I mean, the timing, we were under the constraint. There was a month from when they announced they're going to start the process, as far as we know, to when they were going to make a decision. It was 3 weeks. So, and it's not like it was sitting out there for 6 months and we didn't do anything. It just came up.
I understand that. I just think that we should all be transparent about how it all went down. That's all.
Yeah. And I think, Sandra, I think the one point that you make that is that I think we're not missing is we were expecting that maybe it would be a no, but we were expecting a different kind of no. I think you would agree, right? Because I think one thing that I think the community doesn't know as broadly as we do is that we had a lot of discussion, and like there were task force members who I think were really good about saying, you know what, this ask needs to be formed in a very specific way, and that you really need to be considering a lot of things. And the ask changed because of that. We really together came from all different viewpoints to put together an ask with the expectation that we would hear back which parts were acceptable, which parts weren't acceptable. And granted, it was a short turnaround, but again, I think as Steve is saying, we only found out about it. We did it as quickly as we could.
And I think I would also like to state, kind of for the record, that we as a task force were united in the agreement to send when we sent on Friday night. We all agreed, yes, this letter works. And I think that there were also 3 asks, and not all 3 of the asks were time sensitive. Not all 3 of the asks had anything to do with the process. Some of them were just about, hey, can you just share a little information with us? And we were told, not even after the fact will that happen for us. So I think that, again, there was the one that might have had to do with process, but the other 2 were not about process at all. It was just about transparency. And we were told, nope. And I think that's important too.
I agree. And can I just ask a question? So I think I just got kicked off, of course. Are you guys there?
We can, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I don't know what's happening. Someone keeps muting me. I don't know who that is.
Only because we can hear your chapping, my friend.
You can hear my,
we can hear the background. So your background makes it.
So we're muting you unless you're actually chatting.
yeah, okay. As long as I'm being muted by you guys, I'm okay. Thank you.
That was your question. Oh, okay. Gina, you're on mute, please.
There are a couple of questions about the process, and I think that I'm going to turn it over to the town attorney to answer. But I think Kathy asked if the town rejected the task force request based on timing. A member of the public said it's not the task force's fault that the police commission was opaque. And then Rob Smolder said, hopefully the goal is that everything the town does, including hiring a police chief, should always be done through a racial justice lens. Ideally, there shouldn't have to be an ask. So to that end, I think, Attorney Baldwin, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Let's just make sure no one else on the task force has a comment. Doug, Innie, Tamisha, we just did Jason. I just want to make sure that everybody feels heard on the task force.
Well, I think what I was thinking is that we would hear from Attorney Baldwin and then continue this conversation.
Great.
Is that okay with the task force? Okay. So Jim, it's all you.
Thank you. I'm actually really happy to be here with everybody and see the team that's gathered and all the interested people. And I guess there are more than 50 people on this call, and that's a great thing. I had a very good experience working together with Nancy and Gina on crafting the mission statement. We spent countless hours, and we had agreements and disagreements, and it's not easy. The process of putting something like this together and then seeing it through is not easy. I want to talk first about process, and it is difficult. We're constrained by statutes, we're constrained by charter provisions, we're constrained by Robert's Rules of Order. As we were struggling in the beginning of this meeting, and to that point, I want to remind everybody, this is kind of like a public service announcement, that it's important for FOI purposes that people do the best they can to identify themselves when they're speaking in these meetings, assuming that this is only going to be, it can only be heard via audio transmission when it's posted to the website. It's unnatural for us to do that as people, as we're used to conversations, but just technically speaking, we should all try to do that. If somebody can try to remember, it's a good idea. And I don't mean to be too legalistic here, but I guess that's my job and that's my role. And it dovetails well, however, with my enthusiasm for this important task force and its mission, and it's heartfelt, and it's a wonderful combination of both the law, process, and also purpose. And it's my honor to be in front of you tonight. Karen, I want to key off on what you just spoke about, and like a lot of controversies, it's most often a matter of miscommunication or misunderstanding. You are correct. I agree with you that there's only one item in the letter which was requesting, participation of some form or another or information. There was only one aspect of that which was clearly objectionable, and you identified it. And as to the other aspects of the letter, the two other asks, if you will, I don't think there's an issue with that. I mean, there's some confidentiality issues, and maybe some of these discussions, especially the third bullet, in those discussions with the commissioners, or I don't know who you want to have it with, but that's something that can be done as long as it's done kind of delicately. And you all identified and recognized the importance of privacy, and certainly in personnel matters, and certainly in police matters, those are important factors to consider when interviewing people and publishing those responses. And you've discussed that earlier tonight. So I think it's very simple. And Karen, I think you keyed it. And again, as to why that request was denied, it's because the task force's mission, which we worked so hard on crafting, is to do that which you're talking about tonight. It's the investigation, it's the research, it's the analysis, and the hard work that you're putting into all that to come up with a blueprint and ultimately a report to the town, to the Board of Selectmen. And I'm impressed by how far you've gone already in that regard. So all I'm doing and all I want to accomplish tonight is to make sure that the task force is on the same page in terms of its mission and its purpose as it exists according to the mission statement.
So Jim, I think
I
it'd be
don't
really
know if
helpful.
there's, I'd like to know if there's disagreement as to that.
Yeah,
basic
Jim, I
premise
actually
of
think
mine.
I actually think it would be really helpful for you to clarify for us exactly how you feel like we didn't follow the mission, because I think, as you have said a number of times, we spent a long time on this mission and we went back and forth on it quite a bit. And I was quite clear in the drafting it that I wanted to make sure that we were a task force that actually could make changes. And, you know, I understand, it sounds like, and I don't want to misquote you. So this is where I think I'm struggling, is that, you know, it seems as though your interpretation is that the mission of the task force is to write the blueprint and really not do anything else until that blueprint is done. Whereas my thought and the spirit which I was putting it on was that we would create a blueprint ultimately, but at the same time, start the work initially. Because ultimately, my feeling is if we were a fire safety task force and the building was on fire, we wouldn't say we can't put it out because it's not our time yet. We put the fire out. And our perception was this was an opportunity, because the town isn't going to hire another police chief, most likely during the tenure of this task force. I mean, Bob is a young guy. Hopefully he will be in that job for a very, very long time. And so it felt very important to us as a committee, because this task force came to fruition in response to people's questions about policing in this country. And so we felt like this wasn't, it would really be not doing our due diligence if we didn't help the town recognize that people are asking for transparency. I think back to the meeting that we had way back in June, when people they're asking really pointed questions about policing, and Chief Liddy came up with a response. And so that is what we thought gave us the opportunity to weigh in. And it sounds like you have a different idea about that.
I do. And it's in the four corners of the document. It is not to immerse yourself into the current political processes in town, meaning the day-to-day governance of the town. The purpose, as clearly stated in here, is to do a deep dive and to ask those questions, to do the research, and to do everything that you wanted to, other than participating in the actual interviews with the candidates for the chief of police, because that just crosses the proverbial line, if you will.
So Jim, let me ask you this. When our question was, we ask that the commission share a description of the process by which finalists are identified, including but not limited to outreach, recruitment criteria, and show how racial equity and justice considerations are a part of it. We asked for the commission to share information. The answer was no, that's overreach. The other thing that we asked was, after the hire is made, the commission discloses how racial equity and justice factored into the final hiring decision. That's overreach also. So
No,
asking
Karen,
questions is
you,
overreach?
I'm sorry, but I That's not what I said. And I think that those are very valid inquiries to
But
be
your
made.
email to us was not this conversation. Your email to us was your request goes well beyond the task force charge on several fronts. It is political, it is premature, and it is not sanctioned by the mission statement. That was your response to us in writing.
And Karen, like I prefaced my remarks so many times, so often, disagreements or arguments are rooted in miscommunication. So if I failed to communicate and articulate clearly that I was focused on that request, I apologize. But I'm saying now to you and everybody listening that it was the crossing, the line was crossed when you asked to participate in the process as opposed to investigate, learn about, ask questions about the process.
So Jim, can I just ask a follow-up question to that? So I understand your message. I don't agree with your message, but I just want to just challenge that for a bit, right? Because essentially what you guys came back to us with was to say that the 1930 charter that was in place is the place that we're comfortable with in 2021, right? So that tells me right there.
No, Sonia,
let me finish.
that's not correct.
It's my
But
turn to
you can
talk.
go
Let
ahead,
me
but please
finish.
don't put
So
words
what
in my
that
mouth.
says to me is in 2021, the town of Fairfield has not appreciated where your African Americans or minorities are, right? Let me finish because we gave you ample time to say what you had to say, not only to the press, not only here, but also in writing. So my challenge to you is, and it is a challenge, whether I'm on this team or task team or not, is to say, what do you understand about being oppressed? That's my question to you. I just want that answer. What do you understand about being oppressed because of either your gender or your race? I'd like to hear that from you.
Yeah, I'm not going to engage
Of
you,
course you're
Sonia.
not. So this is my point, right? So I think
That's-
everybody in the community can hear that. You don't have a point of view because you're not in the
Sonia,
same.
I
you're not in
absolutely
the
have a
same
point of view, but that's
You
not
don't.
the agenda item that's before you. And if
It
you
is
want
the
to discuss,
agenda item. You look at your screen right now and you look at the number of people that are not part of this task team. Just look at it. If you can, just scroll down and look what they're saying. You're not in touch with the Fairfield community. And this
Okay.
is what This is what saddens me as someone that's been in Fairfield for 15 years, who is a professor at UConn, who is a senior vice president at a PE, who owns her own business here, who is an African-American female, who has supported Fairfield as a realtor. And I think you personally don't understand what it means to be underrepresented. If you do, I want to hear it. That's all I'm saying. I want to hear it. So I want to pause there. I don't want anybody else to say anything. Jim, tell me what it's like to be underrepresented.
Sonia, I don't, Gina, I don't know if you were about to speak, but I think
I think so. Sonia raises a question that I think is a side question to, and Sonia, I want to get to that. We have to get to that answer too. But I think and please tell me if I'm misstating. I think what Sonia's saying is that when we put the request out and you ignored the whole thing, you are going to raise concerns in people that come from a personal place. And it's lovely that you're saying now that this wasn't about anything except for that one ask was an overreach. And had you responded to us in kind, because I want to make it perfectly clear that in our discussion, we recognize that there may have been problems with that part of it. But we felt like it was really critical that we ask, because we believe, and I continue to believe, that the community expected us to ask that the community expected us to ask you for transparency in the process. And by doing it, we asked to be in the room. Now, if the answer was we voted on it and it's not okay because we already have a process in place, we would have been able to accept that. But your response, as Karen read back, was not that. It was, the whole thing was an overreach. And even what you started to say when you first spoke to us was that this is against the mission. Even tonight, you didn't clarify that one part was against the mission. You said the whole letter was against the mission. And if you're telling us that you misspoke, what Sonia is saying is, when you misspeak on these issues, you were going to raise that question in people. You raised that question in Sonia. She was really, I think, very clear and articulate about what the question that came from her for you. I think looking in the chat, people are saying that, they want to know what we're talking about. They really want to know more about, what is the difference between us asking the question in that way and not. And it sounds like what you're saying is there really wasn't one, that there was nothing wrong with that question. Is that correct?
I think I started this off by explaining to Karen that I agreed that those two other aspects of the request were appropriate, and the way they go about it is
So
perhaps.
So why is the
delicate.
first time we're hearing about that now?
So,
I
well,
have to say, and if
Gina, the reason is, as I said before, which is,
I really want to remind the group a few things because people have alluded into the chat. Just a reminder to the group, we are here specifically to talk with the attorney about process.
thank you.
Sure. And I think we have to this is very emotional for people. It's been very emotional for me. I can share some of the hate mail that I have received. We can talk about all that, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But Mr. Baldwin, it would be a misrepresentation of the tone and tenor of your letter to say that you simply said no to a request. Yes, Sandra, it was late in the day on Friday, and we did that because we tried to have a special meeting. We didn't have quorum. We had to get a letter out. We were responding to the nature of our circumstance and timing. We are grown-ups, Mr. Baldwin. We can be told no. It was the way in which we got such a smackdown from asking a question. Asking a question was you used words like it's not appropriate, it was an insertion, it was an overstep. You used the word political. And by the way, I'd like to remind all of us, this is a political process by the very nature. And Mr. Whaley had commented on some of the humdrum part of the process in the beginning. This is a political process. What we are not is divisive. The letter we sent with a precursor that said, and it was sent to the commissioner of the police, by the way. It was not even sent directly for permission, but even that was met with hesitance. We were told by the first selectman and by you that it would have been more appropriate had we reached out to you first. We did not think we needed permission. So I think we need clarification on that, but we also need clarification on why it is so triggering that asking a question, which we could have handled any number of answers, asking a question was somehow so triggering that it caused you to use words like inappropriate, insertion, overreach, when we've been functioning all along as this is exactly within our purview. And if that one part wasn't overreach, tell us that. This is a work in progress. This is where the difficult conversations come in. But you did ignore point 1 and point 3. And I also want to make it very clear, it was very personally offensive that the article this morning, what was represented by you and our first select woman, who I have a good working relationship with, it was very frustrating to me that this somehow turned into a personal attack of our belief that the police and the individual candidates were not somehow qualified. This was never about the specific candidates. We are thrilled. I can't speak for the entire task force. Many of us are very happy with the outcome. He has been an ally and an advocate. So that is the frustration you are sensing. And I think I'd like just to remind us once again, this really is about process, procedure, and what the perception, your perception, because Gina and I interviewed over 30 candidates. with, I think, a very different understanding of what our role was. Thank you for your time.
May I respond now, Nancy?
Please, please.
Well, all that I really heard tonight is about my letter and about my personal experiences and beliefs. As you pointed out, this is about the process. And again, apologize if you took any offense, and I was insensitive to how my letter would be received, and it wasn't articulate or articulating the points as well as perhaps it should have, which is why I asked that perhaps it would be a good idea to have this conversation. But I'd like to focus this conversation on what we agree on. And what I've picked up on so far is an agreement that perhaps it was an overreach to ask to have actual, two members in an HR procedure and ask questions to the commission.
That's not,
No,
I
but-
actually take it, that's not what I said.
We're saying we're open to the possibility that it could be. We were open to that possibility. I don't think any of us.
We don't believe it was an overreach. We actually believe that, we were thoughtful about it. And I want to make it very clear to everyone on this call, we absolutely were not asking for any decision-making because that does go against the town charter. We did not.
I said asking, do I need to read it?
It might be useful for you to, sorry, it might be useful for you to actually read what you sent us. So everyone can hear what
It's
you
not
sent.
about the letter.
No,
It's
I'm
about-
saying,
we're
no,
here-
I'm saying, Jim.
I'm gonna direct this. I'm gonna
What you
stop
sent
the,
us
I'm
or
not gonna
no?
allow the
Why don't
personal
you-
attack.
Why don't you just
Fair
read-
You're gonna
enough.
let me finish, please.
Why don't you read,
Jim,
our,
can you-
Sandra, if you would mind me, why don't you just read our requests, Jim? Because I think maybe there's some question there.
The one which I take issue with, right? The task force requests the following: that 2 members of the task force participate in the finalist interviews and have the opportunity to ask questions pertinent to racial equity and justice.
And
Go
you
on.
said that- and
And that is where it crosses the line as to the scope and purpose of the task force at this time. I want to emphasize that getting answers to those questions about how the process works, indeed, you made reference to the charter since 1930 and how the police commission has been run. All that is fair game for investigation and criticism into the current processes in town. And that indeed is the very purpose of this important task force. But it is not at this point to insert yourself into an ongoing personnel matter with regard to the police department or any other department in town, other than to make the inquiries and to learn about that process. And that's the extent of it. But it was that point of asking to participate in that process where the line was crossed. And I want to emphasize again that if my response was insensitive or it was taken the wrong way, I do apologize for that. And I'm sorry that's the way it was received. But I don't apologize for the fact that it was.
I'd love to hear from the task force because I think
Yeah, Nancy, I'm not done yet. Thank you. I'd like to respond to something that you said, Nancy, earlier, and that is that we have had a very good working relationship, you and I, and you have not hesitated to pick up the phone and ask me questions, whether they're in confidence or whether it's on technical legal matters or procedural matters. And I was somewhat set aback by the fact that did not happen in this situation, because I do believe in the collaborative process. I do believe in communicating with people. And this is something that I would have, based on my past experience with you and interactions, something I would have expected that you would have done with me. as you've done in the past. And so I felt like it was, I took it, talk about interpretations and how messages are received. I interpreted it as being something that was intentionally avoided.
No,
Because Nancy, none of this, my point is that none of this would have happened had you picked up the phone.
in this instance, because we are.
So,
Nancy.
Nancy,
I'm sorry, I'm going to respond to this, Sonia. Jim, in this instance, we have been functioning as a task force for months now, and we've done many, many things where I have not picked up the phone, because I pick up the phone when I have questions. To me, this was not a question. We addressed this to the person that we believed was the most appropriate, and that was the police commissioner. I think you are misrepresenting, and thank you for your apology about the letter. I personally, appreciate the apology. I'm not speaking on behalf of the other task force members, but it was most certainly misread. I didn't ask the question because I didn't have one for you, because in our minds, there was nothing to ask about. We referenced the charter, we had read the state statute, we have been functioning as an independent board, as you told us we would have the opportunity to do in the many hours of discussion that we had over the summer. Again, this was not a simple thank you, but no thank you in your letter. And I would hate for it to be misrepresented as such. It felt like a smackdown. Now, you may not have intended that, but you are not a woman. You are not a person of color. And I'm not saying that other than intention is one thing, but how something is received is another. And I think that I'm not gonna, again, speak for the rest of the task force. I can tell you how your letter made me feel, and it felt terrible because it wasn't the way that you and I have had communications in the past, where you also would have picked up the phone and said respectfully, thank you, but no thank you. And I go back to this idea that we are 11 grown-ups. And if you had a problem with that, it really would have, some of this could have been avoided had you said, and I resent the implication that somehow it is my fault here for not picking up the phone. And I'm not taking that on, frankly. That somehow this could have been avoided had you said, number 2 is an overreach. Let's figure out 1 and 3. Or, you know what, now is not the time. Let's talk about that. You could have said literally 50 other things. So I think it's important that we hear from the other task force members. And again, just a reminder, I know this is very emotional, but if we could, and I am talking to myself as well, I'm going to call Jason. We haven't heard from you. Innie, I see your hand up. Why don't we turn to Innie?
So, Attorney Baldwin, thank you for coming out and speaking to us. What has happened with the letter is actually a great reminder, because there's a lot in front of us that we need to work with. So if we can look at it as this was somehow blundered by both sides, we can accept that, but we need to make sure that the attorney, the town attorney, and the task force is very clear on what the next steps for other things that are going to come up. The process of how we should proceed. That is where I would feel you at this point would add great value to provide the clarity for all the task force members that what is an overreach and what is within our domain. I think if we have that clarity going forward, it would be much easier for all of us. And once again, I appreciate you coming. It's not easy, what has happened, what has transpired, and I echo what the members of the task force are feeling. It is because when you are a minority, in any sense, way, or form, we are up against what we call a mountain, a hill. And so every little thing is perceived, this is not little, but everything is perceived through that lens. And while we appreciate and we are very grateful that Fairfield has put together this task force, equity task force, it would defeat the purpose if the voice wasn't heard and we were just a rubber stamp. And that, I think, is the underlying really worry and concern of the town, of all of us. We have invested so much heart, soul, and mind into this. And if it is just a rubber stamp for the town of Fairfield to put out there, yes, we did our job, but we are going to continue as is, that would be a disservice. And if that's the case, even if the town of Fairfield says maybe 30% or 40% of us think like that, I think it would be time now then to dissolve this commission instead of going forward and investing all this time in it. So I'd like you to speak to that. What do you, in your ideal situation, want this commission to come out, task force to come out and say, this is what you can do, this is where you are appreciated, this is where we want your input, instead of us going around and investing all this time?
Thank you. I really appreciate your words, and I think the answer is pretty straightforward in my view, and hopefully I can articulate it. And that again, I don't want to repeat myself, but it's the important work is to investigate, research, and come up, as the mission statement says, with areas in town governance that need to be addressed and improved upon. And you're going to come up with a blueprint and recommendations, hard recommendations to the town bodies on those items that in the task force's opinion should be changed or addressed in however way the recommendation comes out. But the process of this task force coming to that conclusion is one of investigation and analysis, and not engagement and participation in the political processes in town. And that's where the line is drawn. And I'd like to note for the record that when I called it political, I meant it in the sense of the workings of governance in a town. That was the intended use of the word political. I'm a political science major, and that was the purpose of that word. But I hope that does that answer your question, or I'm happy to explain more.
You know, Jim, a little bit more direct.
Yeah,
I need you to be
Attorney, but may I just finish? Attorney Baldwin, that is, we are again going with a lot of words. And I think the clarity for all of us is not there. And so I think probably I don't know how the others feel, but if there were examples that this is something you can do, the task force is guided to do, but this is something you can't do. So that can and can't, there's a line there. So we need to be very clear as to, so we don't overstep again, in your words, and because this is not good for the town. I mean, I've been here for 39 years, and this is not to divide the town between even, the governance and the people. This is not a healthy situation. The situation which all of us, I know all of us on the task force want to be, that we want to be a working partner, in the sense to be there as a sounding board for the town. You have invested all this time in putting together this group of people who is different, who is not the norm of what 98% of Fairfield is. So if 98%, if this 0.2% or whatever, their voices need to be heard, for they represent a constituent of yours. So that's where we're getting at as, so in your mind, if, let's hypothetically take the police chief situation, if there was another high profile situation in town came up. So are you saying that the task force cannot interfere in something as important as maybe the head of the housing department, something was going to go, something of that sort, that the task force has no right to even ask that question? That's my point, is if we had some sort of a line, and then on that we can say, we believe that we have that right, and you will say, no, you don't have that right for X law, that law, that law, and we'll come to an understanding. But we need that. We need that from you, that in the statute or in the town charter, these are the lines which cannot be crossed.
Yes, I think you're correct that the whether it's the Fairfield Housing Authority, the Affordable Housing Authority, or the Board of Finance, or the Conservation Department, zoning, everybody has their sphere and their political bodies, their appointed or elected positions, and there are rules, and those rules are for a reason. Again, we started off talking about process and the importance and how hard it can be to abide by that process. And I think that this is a good example of that. The guideline, just like all the other town bodies have written guidelines, I think are very clear in that this task force is not to, it is to engage all town bodies with inquiries and investigation and analysis questions, but not to engage in the political processes of those town bodies, other than as individual citizens are allowed to speak and be heard at any of their commission meetings or board meetings, of course. But as a task force, I think that I'm saying that it is not appropriate as individual citizens like anyone else, of course. But the task force's role and analysis and ultimately the report, that is the point. That's the culmination of your research. That's the culmination of all your hard work, is going to be that report. And that's the time when this task force, I imagine, would have significant influence over town bodies and perhaps changes to processes and procedures that are otherwise written and ensconced in town government, because there is a process to change those things. There is charter revision, there are ordinances, there's a process that needs to be followed to make all those things happen. And so that may very well be the focus of this task force's, some of their conclusions, that some of them to make recommendations to changes in those written procedures. I hope that answers your question.
Jim, let me ask you this, if I may. It's very clear why our participation in the interviews was declined. That is clear at this point.
Say your name.
What was that?
A reminder for everybody to please identify yourself.
Sorry, this is Karen Lynch.
Thank you.
So we understand that. I would like to know why our request for information was denied and out of scope.
Again, Karen, I don't think, well, it's not denied and it's not out of scope. It's denied in terms of it being part of and taken to be contemporaneous with your request to participate in the process. And again, I don't want to repeat myself too many times, but my failure to articulate that was my failure, apparently. But I've never said, and I'm hoping that you're listening to me, that your inquiries into those other two aspects are appropriate.
Okay.
I didn't say that they weren't, other than in my letter, which did not apparently clarify the situation.
No, I needed that clear. And also, may I ask you this pointed question as well? You reference our blueprint, the blueprint that this task force is charged with, sort of in culmination. Are you saying that our either recommendations or suggestions are limited to that blueprint and shouldn't come throughout our time together, but it should simply be make your recommendations on the blueprint, but not prior to that?
I'm glad you asked that question, because as a task force, you come up with recommendations and you vote on them, right? and there's consensus and you take formal votes and everything. Yes. So I guess if you wanted to, you could come out piecemeal, but that's not what it says in the mission statement. It says that you're going to do this investigation and you're going to come up with a report to the Board of Selectmen. So as a task force, you can come out with, I guess, whatever you want to, but it's not necessarily in line with the mission statement and how it was approved by the members of the Board of Selectmen.
Jim, there's a comment in the chat that I'd like you to respond to. It says, this is from Patrick O'Brien. He says, Jim, it sounds like you're asking the task force to point out issues after they occur or before they become a timely issue. You essentially want them to avoid analyzing current affairs. You don't want a living task force or a document. You want a task force that supplies one report. How will citizens and this task force trust town officials to make changes in a future report based on the town? Thank you, Patrick.
I think that is correct insofar as it is not supposed to be engaged politically into the ongoings of the town governance. It is supposed to analyze that, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, and come up with its recommendations. That is clearly the point of this task force. And Gina, you and Nancy will recall our discussions about whether this is a permanent task force or whether what might grow out of this task force and what the recommendations might be after your analysis and report is completed. And one of those things included the possibility of having a permanent task force, which I imagine, I'm not the task force, but might include just those things and state that is the purpose of the new commission or town body or whatever you have. But that is not what this task force is charged with. That is not the mission of this task force.
I'd like to say something. This is Steve Bogan. So the way I looked at this whole police chief hiring is it was an opportunity for us to sit there and listen to the process. You know, what better opportunity is there than to be there? And from that, we were going to come back and make recommendations. We weren't concerned with who we were going to pick for the chief. We just wanted to see the process. So your response back was, it was since the 1930s. It's like, that makes me even more reason to be a fly on the wall while the process is going on. It's an opportunity. It's not, we're overstepping. It's so if the answer was, you know what, you guys would be great if you guys would sit here, don't say anything, don't ask any questions, but it'll go right into your blueprint. That's where I'm confused.
Point of clarity, the 1930 comment came actually from a comment made in the police commission meeting referencing the system that's been in place in terms of the hiring process since 1930. It did not come directly from Attorney Baldwin. So I just want a point of clarity that the statement was made about the 1930s. Yeah. It is true that it is an old archaic process, but it was not Jim that said it.
Right. It's not important. What the point is, you have this task force. We have this process we've been going through since the 1930s. Maybe we can get a little help from the task force. Let them sit in on the meeting. Or I don't see why that's a simple answer. You know.
Yes, Steve, can I respond to that? Because I think we're on the same page. It is perfectly appropriate for you to ask questions and meet with the police commission and the police department, of course, and to find out about that process and learn about the process, but to engage in the process. This was an actual, interviews. This was the active process of going and.
That's what we're here to do. We're here to get in the middle of this stuff. We're not. But we don't need you to tell us what happened. We want to be in the room. I mean, that's what we're here to do. We're not asking to say anything or have a vote. But what better opportunity is there to understand the process than to sit in a room?
Well, part of that process, Steve, is the fact that it's done in executive session for a whole host of reasons. That means that it's done in private and confidence. Nancy participated in that executive session as an ex officio member of the board. And again, maybe that is the process that's in place, and that was a process which perhaps this task force will come out and say that that's wrong. You think it's wrong, and you have your own recommendations, but that doesn't mean that you can override the procedures and process which is currently in place in order to pursue your mission.
Well, so can we get, wait, I just want to ask a
I'm sorry,
follow-up
Steve,
to my
go
other
ahead.
question. It's Steve still. So can we get a list of the questions that was asked? I mean, that's all we wanted to know. We wanted to make sure there were some racial equity questions asked.
Yeah.
Can we get-
There's a long answer and there's a short answer. Those questions are proprietary, believe it or not, because they come from a third-party testing agency, and there's a non-disclosure agreement
Yeah, Jim, I
haven't finished
apologize
talking about.
because here I'm sitting in and I'm saying with an HR professional that has 30.
I'm sorry to be disrespectful, but Sonia, you please have to let Jim answer the question that Steve posed. I'm very sorry. Jim, go ahead.
I'm satisfied with his answer. He said it was proprietary from the testing agency. That's fine.
And
Sonia.
Doug, you were next. I'm sorry, you've been waiting to speak.
Doug Bunnell. And there's something, Mr. Baldwin, seems fundamentally flawed in the negotiated mission statement of this task force. If we are not able to witness and sit in on the processes of the town administration, how are we supposed to make specific and informed recommendations about how the processes work? There's some, and I want you to understand, I hope you do, that this has triggered deep skepticism about whether this task force can be effective and whether there's actually a commitment from the town and from you to actually empower us to make the sorts of recommendations that would really matter. So we feel boxed in here. I think there's a logical flaw in the design of this. And can I just, I'm going to piggyback on this and just get this out of the way.
Yeah.
Your apology for the email or the letter you sent to Ms. Lefkowitz doesn't feel quite sincere to me. It's not that she was oversensitive or that anyone misinterpreted it. I read that letter and I was aghast at the patronizing, condescending sort of, stay in your place message to it. And that may be hard to hear, but I just wanted to make sure you heard that from another person who read it, I wasn't on the receiving end of it, but it was deeply troubling. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I think I fully appreciate that more than you know, because I've heard it from everybody and I understand there's consensus on that point, and I appreciate the reason for the consensus. With respect to not being allowed to participate in the process and being denied that opportunity, this is a very particular part of the process, which is an HR decision, which is done in executive session by the police commission, asking sensitive questions, and there are personnel issues and HR reasons why that is not in and of itself not appropriate. And it's not limited to the police department. I don't suppose that the task force would want to sit in on all job interviews or something along those lines, right?
I'm so done with this shit.
I think we're getting a little stuck in the weeds of the context. I think ultimately there's a
But I want to reach agreement with Doug on that last point. Would you propose that you have a member of the task force involved in all interviews?
No, that's not what
HR
we're
interviews?
proposing. You're missing the complete
I'm asking
Wait a
Doug.
second.
I'm happy.
No,
I'm
I
happy
know,
to
you're
answer, and
asking
I'll
Doug, but
defer my time
no
to
one wants to hear what
Sonia.
I have to say. And I'm representing, I think, the minority in Fairfield.
I think the question is, and this came in the chat
Kidding me?
from Patrick, which is how can citizens and the task force trust town officials to make changes in a future report based on the town's response to the situation? And so I think we could spend a lot of time going into sort of the context of, which interviews we should sit in or others, but I think there seems to be this larger issue here of why, what is our role? Because the question about, just let me finish, please. I'm not finished speaking. The question is really that this misunderstanding kind of came from a place of us not really understanding, I think, fully, and I'm not sure that I still understand fully from you, is what you're saying that the task force should do nothing until the end? It's just to make sure that we're all clear, because I don't want to leave it like, I think it's still questionable. Are we saying that if something were to come up that felt like it was pressing toward racial equity and that we really felt was timely, we should not
Wait.
try to be involved directly at all? Is that kind of the understanding?
Pretty much. And let me explain.
Well, I think we understand why, but I just want to.
I want to explain in the example of the police commission and the hiring the police chief.
I think we've kind of examined that one. We understand.
No, I want to use that as an example because, to my knowledge, the task force has not made any findings or conclusions with respect to that process. To the contrary, the task force was interested in learning about the process and knowing more about how it works. And at the same time, however, it wanted to insert itself into the process.
So again, I think we're getting into the weeds of that because this is clearly.
Well, but I'm using it as an example.
We've heard you, and I think
I'm
we
using it as an example because the same can be said about the Conservation Commission.
But I do think we understand.
Gina, as the chair, may I say something?
Sure.
Thank you. It is with regret, but with my integrity intact that I respectfully remove myself from this racial equity task force for the town of Fairfield. And my reason for removing myself from this task force is based heavily on the lack of trust and transparency shown by the town representatives directly involved in the most recent inquiry by this task force to merely be represented at the table of the chief of police selection process for the town we live in and are asked to represent on the racial equity front. The public comments made by the select woman and the town attorney make it crystal clear that transparency and the willingness to actually hear from the perspectives of the underrepresented people of color is not welcomed. Our mere request resulted in our task force actually being insulted for having even dared to request such a seat at the table and bringing this request forward. This is a clear, let me be clear, this is a clear modern day example of how structures that have been in place for years are allowed to remain in place, even though they clearly are not serving the people. So let me finish. The process that we use to make selections for the chief of police is grounded in a charter of 1930. 1930, hold on to that for just a second. Need I reflect on what has happened in this country from 1930 and the sentiment that weighed in that put our minorities at that time. Our task force was merely asking to be involved in the process. We didn't say we didn't agree with the candidates. We said be involved in the process so that we could be advocates and partners with the community and with the commission so that we could speak our voice to the town residents and support them and legitimate the confirmed process and transparency to the racial equity issue that we have in Fairfield. So the response, let me be clear. Let me just be clear. This response received from the town officials, we're supposed to be committed. You're supposed to be committed to racial equity and transparency and fair playing fields, confirms, and I'll say it again, confirms your unwillingness to meet us there. Apparently in 1930, the Fairfield Charter was so right, it's so unquestionable, it's still appropriate for citizens in 2020. With that, I resign. I wish you all the very best.
So I think we're at a place, and this is why I kind of we're not getting anywhere, right? The issue is, and I think this process has made people feel very vulnerable and exposed. That's been clear on this call, that people are feeling not heard. And the questions about what the formalities of asking things and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, it does leave the feeling that we're not going to actually be able to achieve anything like a task force if we have to always think about things that we wouldn't have considered, you know, that we can't ask questions and we can't look to improving, because ultimately, regardless of where we stand right now, this entire thing came from a place of wanting to help and advise and help people move forward, and to really make sure that the town could feel confident and comfortable about the decision. Now, I think I just would like to make sure that we really feel, or we're really clear about what you believe this task force could achieve in the process.
I'm sorry, what was the question? What it can achieve or could achieve?
What is it what could we achieve if the whole purpose of it is to make one blueprint and to not weigh in otherwise, how do we actually then make change?
Well, first I want to address your statement that it's a matter of what questions you can and can't ask. It's not a matter of being unable to ask questions. You should be able to ask any questions that you want. It's the line is drawn again in participating and engaging in the political processes of town. That's where it crosses the line. So there's no bad question. There's no wrong question, as long as it doesn't cross the line. I just want to make that clear, because I'm not here to make the distinction as to where your inquiries should be or what they should be about. Just as I'm not here to direct you towards one conclusion or another. That's the job of the task force, right? So the task force, the culmination of your work, as described in the mission statement, is the at the heart of what your purpose is. And I can't read the future, but assuming you come out with a report with strong recommendations and what have you, that's when the engagement part into the political process truly begins. When it's presented to the Board of Selectmen and or disseminated to town departments and town bodies, whether it's the Board of Ed, the police department, or the HR department and the administration. That's the culmination of your work, and that's when the rubber meets the road, so to speak. But I can't predict the future, and nor can you. Like we discussed earlier, Gina and Nancy, you know, there may be recommendations about the future permanent commissioner or task force, if you will. But you haven't engaged in the work yet. Your work is not finished. As you noted earlier in your meeting before I started talking and presenting, there's a lot of work to do. It's a work in progress. And to jump to conclusions, just as nobody wants to jump to the conclusions that are in the deep dive because it's not comprehensive enough and it needs to be buttoned up and everything. The same can be said about why it's just not the task force's purpose to come out and engage itself in day-to-day governance. And that's the only distinction I want the task force to appreciate. And everything else is open. And the conclusion that the task force makes in the end is certainly going to be one of great significance. But we're not there yet. This is a work in progress, as everybody has recognized before we started talking tonight.
So there is some questions in the chat that I think
I want to address before we move on to the community at large, and I appreciate that. There are a few comments I want to address. GR Max had said, you're deeply concerned about the way we're communicating. And I just want to reiterate for this group that something I said in the beginning. This is a space that the task force has created over several months where it's safe to have challenging conversations. And the work of the task force, it is inherently emotional and charged and difficult. So some of you may be offended with tone, and I'm not apologizing for any one individual, but progress is in the conversation. I want to remind us of that. Again, not afraid of not having I'm not afraid of the conversations. I think a lot of us are afraid of not having them. And what I'm also reading through a lot of the other comments, and I think the concern with the mandate as it's interpreted, and I think we still have some trouble. I think I'm personally still kind of at a loss. And I hear the words you're saying, Jim, but it's somehow not computing, because there really clearly is an outcry. And I go back to this idea that asking the question, although you're saying we're okay to ask questions, it was so triggering somehow. But I think that there's clearly a public outcry for this task force to be a voice, to be a bridge, to be an observer. And it seems like we're being excluded from certain process just because that's the way it's always been done. And there's no sort of flexibility to that. Feels somehow like that's where we go back to Karen's original question of it being, or I'm sorry, Doug, or whoever talked about the skepticism of the effectiveness. And Aleth, I know you said we have to continue the work and bury in, but I think we're all needing to make sure that we're committing to something that actually is not just in name only or a tick box exercise. And some of what I hear you saying is right now, at least in the short term, feels a little like this is something that gets to be dangled as something we're doing, but yet when it comes down to some of the tricky work and the difficult stuff and the uncomfortable stuff, that's when we go, oh, can't do that. That's not the way we've done it before. So there's no room. So
no, Nancy, if I may, it's just not it's not the stated purpose that we work so hard on this. The REJTF will accomplish its mission through the collection and examination of qualitative and quantitative data, active listening, convening conversations, identifying best practices, and collaborating with existing organizations to formulate a racial equity plan for the town of Fairfield. And then it concludes as to when that should happen and who it should be presented to. It talks about deep inquiries into town policies, procedures, ordinances, and charter review, task force membership, all right, the advocacy and continuous learning. My point is that nowhere in this document does it say that it's going to engage political bodies, whether it's a police commission, a fire commission, a board of ed, and participate as an active voice in their ongoing decisions of town. That's where the disconnect is. You're gonna, yeah.
I'm sorry, but you actually read a statement. You said collaborating with existing organizations. That's what that meant. I wrote that line, and that's what I meant.
Well, the task force is committed. Right, where's collaborative?
Committed to collaborating with existing organizations. What we were asking to do was to collaborate with an existing organization in order to draft the blueprint.
Yes.
That was actually, and so it is in there.
Yes, collaborate. Yes.
Right. So sitting in on the interview is a collaboration. Again, not asking for decision-making power, just to sit in the room and talk to them and collaborate with them on an existing process. That's why we felt it. That is why we did believe that it was not outside our scope.
I understand that to be the case, Gina, and the fact is that it's not appropriate for lots of legal reasons, technical reasons, FOI reasons, and again, that's understandable as to why you believe that would be allowed. And
so I think in that sense, right, we don't have a disagreement. We were not going outside of our scope. We did believe it was part of the scope, and I think you were agreeing. Now, whether there are limitations to the scope, I think we were always open to understanding when it was going to be intrusive or when it was going to violate the charter. We actually thought that we had interpreted it that way, and recognizing that we wanted to collaborate with the commission. We were not asking to have decision-making power. We were not even actually asking to be part of the deliberations. We were asking to collaborate on the interview process. And again, and I think in the future, to just say hands off of all organizations, to me, kind of goes against that particular line that says this task force collaborates.
I hope if you take anything out of this discussion that you understand that that's not the position that I'm taking at all, that you shouldn't engage those town bodies and collaborate with them. Absolutely, you should. So it is a very narrow area that we came across in this situation, because not everything is personnel related or limited by those kind of issues, privacy issues, or for that matter, done in executive session. So it's a very narrow area, but I think it brings up.
And again, I think we understood that for sure. We absolutely understood executive session, and I think that again, and what I want everyone on this call to understand is we have never had a meeting that was this contentious ever. This group has been working together for months. We have never had a meeting like this ever, because we did feel like we understood our mission. And we, even on this issue, when we talked about it and we looked at offering collaboration, that's where we were. And so I think even on this call, you've repeated to us a number of times that we need to be out of these other processes because it's not in our mission. And that's where I think we're having this difference of opinion, because if we are to truly collaborate, it is going to be about reaching out and to not have to always wonder what's going to bother someone makes it really challenging to actually do the work.
Yeah. If your use of the word collaboration is to collaborate to understand the processes.
Can't hear you, Jim. Can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
There you go. You're good now.
Okay. If your use of the term collaboration is to collaborate in understanding and analyzing the process, then I agree. If your use of the term collaborate in terms of engaging that town body, whatever it may be, to reach a conclusion and make a decision, then I respectfully disagree, and that's not the purpose of this task force.
I have one thing to add. So part of our process is we're benchmarking against best practices from, this is Steve Bogan.
Yes, hi Steve.
Hey Jim, we're thanks for taking the time too. It's tough, but it's part of the tough conversations that we're
part of the process.
Yeah, so we benchmark against best practices from other towns, and Westport's task force they have a voting decision on the hiring in the police department. So they have it. They've been doing it for 17 years. They established Team Westport. So I'm having trouble with the privacy or issue that you alluded to when Westport does the same thing. Their Team Westport is involved in the process, and they they have a vote on who they hire. So I don't see, you mentioned that it was a personnel issue and this other stuff, but it's not, because Westport does it.
Well, every town is different, Steve, and maybe that's one of the recommendations that comes out of this task force, like I said before, but that's not the process that currently exists in the town of Fairfield.
Right. So building on what I'm saying is that it would have been a great opportunity for us to sit there and see the process so we can make an informed recommendation instead of having to hear. I mean, it would have been the same. There's no doubt that everybody loves, new Chief Calamares. It would have, but it's not about him. It's about the process and an opportunity for us to sit there so we can make a real informed decision for your blueprint. Say, this is, it would be helpful if you updated, this policy and include, the permanent task force in the, but now we're guessing instead. We missed an opportunity is what it comes down to.
And Kathy Wyant puts in the chat, how can the task force make a recommendation, re the hiring of police commissioner, if the task force doesn't know the process?
What about the process is it that the task force is unaware other than the fact that there are interviews conducted one-on-one or, virtually one-on-one.
We want to make sure that they're asking, it's just 2021 after George Floyd. We want to make sure, I had 4 questions that I had. We want to make sure that they're asking questions related to racial equity and kind of their vision and their understanding of the Police Accountability Act that was just passed. There's a couple of questions that are very basic that we just wanted to ask to make sure they were asked.
And maybe you asked them, Jim. Maybe those questions were asked in executive session,
Right.
but we won't know whether they were asked and we don't know what the answers are.
I think, Kathy, I think it's a good point that you make, but it's, I know for a fact that and Nancy can speak to this. I don't know whether all your questions were asked. There were a very limited number and they came from this testing agency. The ability to ask the questions of the commission is saying that you want to engage yourself in the commission. It's kind of a catch-22, right? But so
I think we weren't even presented with the opportunity because we just didn't know. And again, we are a bridge to the community. And Chief Liddy, who's been very open, had we understood more about what the process is, because I can tell you without giving away, it's executive session, it is privileged information. Specific questions, on race and equity are very specific kinds of questions. So unless you are specifically trained or through a lens to ask those questions, they're not going to be asked. We could have submitted questions to Chief Liddy for consideration. There are so many ways we could have done this, but without any understanding, because I asked one of the police commissioners to, and it's in the minutes, that I was charged with finding out what the process was. He didn't even know the process. And then
So what I meant to, I wanted to bring up the point that was one of your inquiries, in fact, and that's one of the, right, that after the police commission discloses how racial equity and justice factored into the final hiring decision, and the first one was a detailed description of the process, and I think I made it perfectly clear tonight that those are proper inquiries. So I think that Steve, that's the answers. Hopefully, most of the answers to your questions would be done by asking those questions and engaging the police commission in those 2 areas. Do you follow me?
Yeah. That would have been a good answer.
But yes.
So Petronea, who comes to a lot of our meetings, actually had a question, and I'm just going to throw it out to her because I'm sorry, Petronea, I can't find it. Do you want to go ahead and ask it?
Jason, you got a question?
Yeah, Petrina.
Sorry, Petrina, sorry. Petrina, do you want to go ahead and ask your question because I can't find it?
And please identify yourself. Please say your name.
I'm Petrina Cash. So my question to Mr. Baldwin is, according to the newspaper article, prior to the task force making this request, the commission decided with a vote that the interview questions and deliberations would be conducted only by commissioners. Can you please explain why a vote was needed for only commissioners to ask questions? I'm just trying to understand that process.
Yes, and I understand your question. Unfortunately, I can't answer it because I'm not a member of the police commission, and I think it would be appropriate question to ask of the chairman. I know that was a public meeting, Trina, that you can go back and listen to when they discussed the process that they were going to have. And by the way, at that meeting, there was the opportunity for public comment. That's a good question, but unfortunately, I don't have the answer.
You said a little while ago, this is Steve again, that you said this process has been in place for forever and to insert ourselves in it, but it hasn't, because they just, like Patrina just said, they just voted on it the other day, like last week.
Yeah,
exactly, and that's my question. So why was a vote needed?
Exactly.
So someone needs to explain that. Again, this goes back to transparency.
Yeah, I think that can be best answered by the chairman, but the process is over, very broadly encompassing word in this context. The process is that it is the police commission's decision on, well, it's their recommendation to the first select woman as to who should be the next chief of police. How they go about this, coming up with that recommendation is up to them, but the process starts with them. So as I understand it, it's my first situation where the chief of police was hired while I was town attorney. As I understand it, they came up with kind of the guidelines, and they first decided on whether or not they want to go outside of the department or keep it in-house into the department. There are requirements, as I understand it, as to what the qualifications are for anybody who is considered for the position of being the chief of police. I think that that's been in place for a long time. So there are a lot of processes and procedures which have been in place for a long time. We talked about 1930, and then there are those which, as part of that old process, allows for the police commission to make a decision on how they want to proceed in actually selecting the chief of police. Again, a good example being, are we going to stay in-house, or do we want to expand the search? And I know that those were discussions that they had at that meeting, the prior meeting, where they made decisions on those, on how they would proceed.
So,
I want to just kick it to the committee.
Who's,
oh, sorry.
who's the chair? Who's the chair? Madam Chair?
Yes.
Jim, right. Who's been in this? For
I
a
was just
while.
actually about to do that, Annie.
Yeah. And we need to come to some sort of an understanding. Where do we go from here? So take over, please.
So I was actually going to ask if anyone else on the committee has anything that they would like to pose to Attorney Baldwin, because there are.
I do.
Jason?
Yeah, I asked, this is Jason Sherrod speaking from the task force.
Hi, Jason.
I know you mentioned something about something being under NDA, but can you speak on what was the interview question pertaining to racial equity? Either you or Nancy, can you speak on what the police chief or what type of interview questions were asked pertaining to racial equity? Is there anything that you can share regarding that? Because I think a lot of us just wanted to understand if that was going to be included in the interview.
I don't know what the questions were. Nancy does, and they can't be.
Jim, you're hard to hear.
I'm hard to hear?
A
Can you
little
hear me now?
A little bit. It's more muffled than it's been, but.
Yeah, I had the same problem hearing Jason. I could barely hear him. I don't know what it is. Hopefully this is a little better. But I don't know what the questions were, Jason. And again, I think that it's a valid inquiry to be made. Whether the exact questions can be revealed, I think the answer is no. But Nancy can answer that better than I can.
I asked the chief of police if I could share the exact questions. The answer was no, they are proprietary. I can tell you that none were, and I am allowed to, I've been given permission to say the nature. There was nothing specific on the issue of racial equity and justice. And while there were opportunities for candidates to take their answers in that direction, there was nothing specific highlighting the area of racial equity and justice specifically.
Okay, thank you. Do you think we'd be able to get a copy? Is there anything that they can, whether?
It's proprietary because apparently there's some, and again, part of us getting stuck in process is exactly the problem, right? And so I think it's, and herein lies where we are. But no, unfortunately, and again, I was in that room as ex officio select woman. I was not there in the role of representing this body, this task force. So I just unfortunately cannot share the specific questions, but I can tell you that none were specific to the issue of racial equity and justice.
Again, I think it's an important point, and Jason, it's a good question, and you were asking me about basically what your first question was presented to the chairman, and I think again that's best answered by the police commission as part of your inquiry, as part of your charge and your mission, to learn and understand it and to make suggestions, if any, or recommendations based on that inquiry. I'm not the person, all I'm saying is to tell you exactly about that process. That's not why I'm here tonight. I was here to talk more about where that line is drawn, if you will, between inquiry and action and engagement in decision-making of town bodies.
Gina, if I could.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, this is Alexandra Ocampo. Mr. Baldwin, clearly you are an expert when it comes to process. You've actually helped me earlier today with some questions, so I thank you for that.
Nice to meet you, Alex.
Nice to meet you as well. Clearly, I understand. I'm hearing exactly what you're saying. Obviously, through the way the mission is written today, and the expectation is January 2022, we come together with a blueprint, and probably not many piecemeal recommendations beforehand. While that is a bit disappointing, what I would say as a eternal pragmatist is that I'm going to work my hardest to make sure that that blueprint is replete with just a lot of incredible suggestions to continue to move the town of Fairfield forward. From a personal standpoint, I will admit, and this is more feedback, less a question for you, Mr. Baldwin, but as a resident of Fairfield who's, volunteering my time just like everybody else here, it was really hurtful to read the newspaper article this morning and read the words of the first select woman, not even implying, but stating that we were trying to take the legitimacy of this new police chief. That was hurtful because, as a member of the task force, but also because I understand the ripple effects that a comment like that from such a respected person in position can have about the reputation of our board, of our committee to the rest of Fairfield, who may have been on the fence up until this point as to what we're doing, should we be doing it, are we causing more trouble? So my feedback, I guess, would just be, to before prepared statements are shared with media about the intent of a task force like ours, who admittedly we all signed up to talk about really tough stuff, to kind of spread those untrue statements, just have a negative ripple effect on us, the constituency, your neighbors, the task force members. And that's just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Does anyone else on the task force have something that they'd like to add?
I just have one more question. I know we have other business to discuss, but I'm seeing a lot of comments about our mission statement and the fact that it perhaps isn't the right one that we should have in place. And I think it's a little bit egregious to think that we won't be able to really make any roads towards change for another year till we can get it done in its completion. What would the process be for revising our mission statement? Or does the task force need to apply or adhere to this one until it no longer exists, when a new one might be started?
Well, there are two questions there. The first question is, how would you change it? And it's done by the Board of Selectmen. That's very clear. That's how any such mission statement or task force charge is created. It's a creation of the Board of Selectmen, this task force. And sorry, your other question was similar. It was, you wanted to,
if we're not, if the misunderstandings about the work of the task force are inherent in this one, then we may feel that we need a new one. So A would be to revise it, or B would be, I would imagine this task force ends and a new one is initiated. Is that accurate? I'm just trying to see what the paths are to a place where the committee members feel that they are making change in our town.
yeah, I think that the path forward is to do the hard work and come up with a blueprint, which, as I understood it, was everybody's common goal, and to present that to the town with your findings and to effectuate change as a result of your hard work and those findings.
Is there any, this is Steve. So that's 1/22 is the date when that ends. What
Or
happens?
sooner.
On or before, right? Yeah. So we can do
yeah.
it anytime. Mhm.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Because so it does feel, well, I was just going to ask again, is there anyone else on the task force that has anything that they would like to add? Because it does seem that there is a difference of opinion, perhaps, as to what and I'll give you the example of what I'm talking about. You know, this clearly people are concerned about this process and about the transparency of this process. It's obvious. It's why we have so many people on this call right now. And the task force recognized that that's what people were going to think. And we also recognize that existing procedures weren't considering it. And the example of that is that when the questions were designed, as Nancy said, a racial justice and equity question wasn't asked. And I do believe that the people on this call expected that that would happen. And so we wanted to make that recommendation to help. And that's always been our process. We really want to help this town reach its potential. And so the question, and it sounds like what you're saying is, if something like this were to come up again, that's not appropriate. It isn't appropriate for us to kind of be part of the process. And I think I heard you. I think we understand that now.
That's correct.
What you're saying is that you don't want it. So then,
not. Yeah, you've got it.
I understand. Yes, I think I understand that. And so I think there seems to be a disconnect because the town, the people who we represent, are telling us that they expect us to do to be more involved. And as Patrick said, it's a reasonable expectation for 21st century policing. So to that end, because my concern is this is going to happen again. You know, it's something else is going to come up and it's going to be timely and it's going to be, we're going to think that we want to help as much as possible. And there's concern. I am very concerned that this line wasn't as clear as you seem to think it is. And I'm worried about another line coming up that we don't even know about.
But I'm so glad you mentioned that, Gina, because I really want to avoid the problems that occurred as a result of the inquiry that you made to the police commission, as well as my response to it. I want to avoid that so that there are no more headlines other than the one stating that your task force is engaging, all these boards and commissions and asking people to participate and finally to come up with your conclusions. But yeah, we don't want this to happen again. And I'd be happy to take a phone call from you to discuss any such situation in the future. I'm sure that this is the first time that the task force has done something like this. First of all, actively participate or try to participate in the political processes of a town body, and yes, that's where the line is drawn. And if there are any questions going forward, I would more than welcome a phone call or to have another discussion with the full task force as you see fit.
So I'm clear on the process. So you would like us to run things by you first to make sure that we're, because we would have to run everything by you because we didn't think this was something we should run by you. So we should run everything by you first.
You may as well come to every meeting.
No, I heard, and I looked at your minutes and I read your deep dive report, and I heard the beginning of this meeting, and it's all grand and it's all what I envisioned and expected and what we considered as being the process for this task force. It is this one situation that that crossed the line, and I think that you appreciate where that difference is, and probably don't need to ask me. But if you think that there's a question or a close call on something, I would encourage you to pick up the phone, or like I said, I'd be happy to have another meeting with your task force to go over it. But I'm confident that you all know and can, understand the mission statement, as I think is pretty clearly written. So I hope so. I hope that's the case.
I don't think we did. I don't really think that we did think that this was something that we needed to run by you first.
Okay.
Or to your
Well,
point, we would have.
Right,
Yeah,
we would have if we did.
Okay. I don't want to.
I think we assumed that we were empowered to do this. And so now I just want to make sure. Yeah, I mean, the statements are saying that the force has no power as the mission statement is currently meeting. We the people want a task force that is free to engage all over town, when and wherever, not report force 2022. I don't know. Okay. That just says member of the public. I don't know who that was.
Well, that's unfortunately, I understand that sentiment, and many people have it, but that's not the mission statement, the purpose that was clearly written and approved by the Board of Selectmen. It's very clear. So.
Well, it's not very clear. To be clear, it's very clear to you. I think it is still really the cause of confusion for a lot of us. I, Gina, would like to respectfully request that we turn to members of the public to give some people an opportunity. I know Dan's had his hand up virtually for a while. And
sorry, I can't. If you wouldn't mind, if you would like to speak, if you would just direct message me your name and then I can call on you, but we'll call on Dan Iacovino first.
Dan, you have to unmute yourself. Dan Iacovino, unmute.
Okay.
And don't forget to say your name.
Dan Iacovino, hi. Thank you. First of all, I just want to say, I think we're all good people here. We're all good people. We're trying to take on the enormous task of, eliminating racism in the town of Fairfield. And, that's just going to be messy sometimes. It really is. But we're all trying to do something that's really big, really broad, and really hard to do. So, and I could understand why, it's challenging and can bring up a lot of hard feelings. And it needs to be understood, particularly for the people of color who experience this. And I also just want to say first that I, since I'm just a member of the public, I did not see the original request nor the response and letter. So I can't be speaking to that. But if I'm understanding things correctly from what you're saying, Jim, is that, this is not in the purview, in your view, of the task force. And I think Karen just brought up this notion of, can the mission of the task force be amended prior to next January? And as a part of that, my question is, is there precedent for other task force, a member of another task force, to be included in some of these things? It sounds like it's, the issue here is really one about confidentiality and, executive session, if I'm reading that correctly, that's sort of the dividing line, if I'm reading that correctly. And so is there precedent in town where other members of a task force have agreed to, have been allowed to participate in executive session and subject to confidentiality, and can only outside of that session, disclose information as it specifically relates to the task force?
Hey, Dan, thank you. I think the answer is no, not to my knowledge has that been done. But I want to emphasize an important point here, and that is that it's not just the engaging in an executive session and an HR decision. It's actually the task force speaking as a body, as a committee, if you will, as a whole, on a matter of current kind of political goings on, and engaging and participating in that, as I said, governmental process, in that political process. And I know that doesn't sit well with members of the task force, but that does go beyond the stated purpose. And I urge everybody who's watching or listening to read the mission statement, because I think it's fairly clear, although people disagree. But that's not to say that individual members of the task force, I know this is like splitting hairs, but that's not to say that individual members of the task force can't speak up on their own, like any person from the public at any public meeting where the process allows for public comment and participation. That I hope I made myself clear.
Rainey Noor had a question.
If I could just follow up.
Oh, sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I think as has sort of been brought up by members of the task force, I think there's sort of confusion about what it means to engage, right? And I think what members of the task force have been saying is that as part of the task force mission is to analyze the workings of the town, right? And observe, and just as an observer, not as an active agent to try to influence those decisions. Like if a person in the task force were to be sit in on some of these interviews, they would not be actively participating in asking the questions or demanding who gets hired and who doesn't get hired. And I think as you're defining it, Jim, you're saying you're defining engagement a little bit more broadly to say even just someone sitting in a room observing is considered engagement, whereas I think people on the task force are saying this is what will help us in doing our work, is by actually observing the workings of what's going on and not actively participating in it, but be people who are observing the process and being able to take that back to the task force to analyze, to make recommendations in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, because I'm glad you asked me for that clarification, because no, to the contrary, it's only in that very narrow place of executive session meetings, which are meetings that it's done in private, where they can't have superpowers to participate in that executive session. But that's not to say that they shouldn't attend meetings and engage in the process by not just listening, but also by asking questions. And I mean, that's the purpose of the task force, and most definitely. And they have broad discretion as to who they're going to ask and what they're going to ask. It's not dictated by anybody. It's something that they decide themselves. So that should be encouraged, and it should be done.
Okay, thank you.
Rainey?
Hi, good evening. Rainey Noor here from Fairfield. Thanks for letting me speak. I am a Fairfield member, and I previously have been involved as a parent representative on the hiring process for our most recent principal at Fairfield Ward High School. where there were other parents involved as well, and there were confidentiality agreements being signed. And so that process, I believe, was very transparent, very open, and involved many stakeholders. And what I see right now is, optics always matter. Right now, the town looks as if they've really squandered a huge opportunity. Based on everything that happened last year, and choosing a new police chief is monumental, especially if it looks like this is not, you want continuity, so you don't want to choose a new police chief every year or so. You want somebody in the job for a long time. So to me, it seems like not using the opportunity to see what can we do, how can we make this the best process we can know right now, and let the task force observe what we think the best process is. Makes the town look like the task force is just a token. And that's, I don't think what anybody wants. So now we have to go and see how that can be remedied. And right now, because the task force is charged to observe what's happening, the report will just state what happened over the course of the last couple of weeks, and then make recommendations going forward. But I'm really disheartened that the town did not really seize this opportunity, especially in light of what happened last year, to see what can we do to make this the very best process for a very, very important hiring decision. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Rainey. Bev had said to me she has a question. Bev, are you still on the call?
Yes, I'm here. Could you hear me? It's Beverly. Could you hear me? Hello, could you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, I was. As I've been stating in the chat, and as an attorney, I understand Jim's predicaments and the commitment, the statement, whatever it's called, a mission statement. It is not written to allow the force to have any real power. You guys are simply a research engine. You do all these quantitative and qualitative research. You provide the numbers as to racial equity, whatever that means. And then you provide at the end of your term in 2 years to the Board of Selectmen what you believe should be. It is not an ongoing duty. It simply needs to be revised. I mean, you're gonna have to go in with Brenda and have a discussion about changing it. And they need to be, you need to have details and actual words that they're legal, collaborative. And it sounds like you're doing a humanities course. It's simply doesn't help the force. And again, it's you just compile information and you provide a report. And I even think I've heard Bill use words like analyze and engagement in the policy, or again, very broad stroke. It's unfortunate, but it's within what you have. You don't have the authority to request what you are requesting because you didn't fight for that in the mission statement. But what I also want to know, the 1930 law that you're referencing, could that be provided in terms of making it available online? So maybe somewhere in that, it does allow a task force of sort to actually have an input. And of course, I understand in terms of privacy issue that someone is not able to go into an interview process. I mean, in terms of actual interview. And that's two. The third is someone referenced a Westport has a force that the committee is able to do such. It would be great if someone could get a hold of that actual mission statement. So maybe you can revise it to look similar to that. And I do know there are towns in which you have a force of sorts, I'm not quite certain what it's called, wherein you can actually have suggestions essentially of who or what, for whatever position you're trying to fill. So this force will give suggestions to the board. So in this case, it would be the police commission as to who they suggest would be right for this, because as of now, the police chief is set. So this discussion is moot. But moving forward, you want to change what we do. I understand that. But to continue to talk about changing what's already been determined. It doesn't really serve a purpose, but I think it serves a purpose as an example moving forward as to how we can be better. And you can go back and forth for 2 hours, but at the end of the day, the statement does not give you what you want. So it would be great to look at Westport's, as someone mentioned, that their force has the right to do that, and look at other towns that either there's a search committee or someplace wherein you can, some ability to provide names of prospective candidates that have been researched, and you can provide the details and provide that information to the commission. And so if you provide 10 names, for example, and they pick one of them, then that seemingly is fair, because you've obviously vetted that person, either by interviewing them yourself or looking at their record, because essentially what you're doing is looking at their record in the past. Just like this new police chief, he was a captain, I believe. So he's been in the town of Fairfield for a long time, and it seems as if most members are happy with him. I mean, again, the task that you set, which is the racial equity, and I mean, these vague terms, are just really not necessarily disheartening, but it's troublesome, and it's too nebulous. It doesn't really get us anywhere. But I obviously have more to say, but I'm going to be going on the road soon. But thank you for listening. I appreciate that.
Thank you for your comment. Karen Wackerman?
Thanks, Gina. I guess I respectfully take issue or don't agree with what Bev just said in terms of the task force mission statement. I think it is very broad, and I have the sense, with all due respect to Mr. Baldwin, that in defending the response to your request, he's announcing these narrow interpretations of that mission statement that I don't think are necessarily obviously there. And I think that's troubling to me, and it shows a lack of commitment on the part of the town to this task force. I think you do have a right, certainly in an executive session, if it's an HR issue, I can understand that, but there were 2 other requests you made for information, and I don't think that's been addressed tonight. And also I hear that you can't be in a political situation or a governmental situation or an HR situation. It seems a little vague what it is you're actually prohibited from doing, but I don't think that's what your mission statement says, that you can't do those things. And also I don't think it says that you can't speak as a body. So I don't think those things are prohibited. So I'm worried that you're being given advice now about what your narrow abilities are as a task force that perhaps isn't really what's said there. And I guess you can each interpret it the way you want, but the fact that it's being interpreted by the town so narrowly, to me, indicates a lack of commitment and not taking this seriously, to be blunt. That's it.
Thank you. Alif?
Gina, perhaps it's worth reading her comment out loud.
Oh, okay.
If she's not able to either, or not doesn't want to. I don't know.
Alif, would you like to?
Alif Fadley here. Is it okay for me to speak?
Yes, I just called on you. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So I've really been listening in on a lot of these calls. I'm not on the board, but I've just been paying attention and really observing a lot of what's happening. And I so appreciate the top talent that we have on this team and all the sweat equity that's going into this. I do feel to some extent that it is so unfair that this committee is not supported well. And that's my honest and opinion. I feel that so much commitment has been spent. This is what I wrote. I wrote that so much time and commitment has been spent on the efforts here, so much top talent on this task force, and much appreciated. How much investment does Brenda really have in this? I suggest revising the mission statement, as Jim noted, sadly, but he's within legal right from my observation. You know, possibly we get some professional analysis, like from some outside experts, you know, lay a proposal on Brenda's desk, you know, at some point, and have her decide whether she's going to, you know, partner with this. I mean, she has to meet us halfway with this. It seems to me as if so much of the effort is within this team. You know, why are all the members here putting in so much effort? We're utilizing all of our time to figure out what we need to do, what we need to get done, how we need to revise the mission statement that's already there. Where is Brenda in this? Like, she has to meet us halfway. Okay, so, you know, we need to call her out. She has to meet us halfway on this. I mean, in the beginning, I mentioned even there was no funding for, like, I'm on the Economic Development Committee. We have a secretary who takes the meetings. Every committee on the town, we have a secretary that we pay to take the meeting minutes. Why is someone with top talent in this group utilizing their time to take meeting minutes? I mean, I just don't really think that it's a good way for time management and skilled talent, you know, moving forward. I think that maybe it's a good thing that this happened so that we could figure out how to, you know, correct our mistakes, or just figure out how to move forward, but do it along the lines of which is legally correct. Apparently, the way that Jim stated that we should abide by some of the town rules, or what's some laws that are in place already. Let's partner with him to see what we can do to revise the statement and get moving. Because if we quit, I mean, it's just going to look like, hey, okay, so we gave them an opportunity to do this, and look, they didn't do it. I mean, I think we should just still try. And yeah.
Thank you, Lee. Michelle McCabe.
Thank you so much. So I'm Michelle McCabe. I'm a Fairfield resident. And I just want to echo what a lot of the other community members are saying. And I know that we've been hearing a lot about process. And the one thing as a community member that I was hoping to hear, didn't hear, and hope to hear in the future is a true interest, curiosity, and desire on the part of our town officials to hear the voices that are represented in our equity task force, that even if there wasn't a particular process that might have allowed for a presence, for example, in an interview process, that there wasn't curiosity and interest expressed on how their input could be integrated in some way that you felt was appropriate, Attorney Baldwin, into the process. And it doesn't bode well for what's going to happen when all of the hard work of this task force comes to what I hope is just a first milestone and not a conclusion, which is to create a blueprint. What confidence do we have that their advice and their input is going to be desired and utilized when, as was stated by other people, here was this moment where there could have been true collaboration and interest expressed. And not only was that not the case, but I'm sorry to see that instead there's another opportunity for divisiveness in the statements made about the task force. So I'm really hoping that this will be an opportunity to see collaboration that shouldn't have to be indoctrinated in a mission statement, but should be desired by the folks that are running the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Patrick O'Brien, Sabia.
Thank you, Gina. I think the point that I want to add here, and I've added quite a bit to the chat over the course of these 3 hours, but I just want to reiterate that it's truly disheartening to watch town officials try to blame a group that is trying to create a better town for a poor policy decision and for following policies that are clearly designed to maintain the status quo. And so I think it's truly the members of the town officials in articles that we've read and words that we've heard tonight that are trying to marginalize this group. And it's really upsetting, especially as someone who just recently moved to Fairfield. And you know, the thing that's also really concerning is that town officials are defending the actions of a police department that are the complete opposite of best practices for 21st century policing. And to defend those actions doesn't make any sense. Town officials should also have a stake in the game for changing the system, regardless of whether you're on this task force or not. And that is really something that has become very clear here, is that the town would like to maintain the status quo and does not want to hear from this body until January 2022, and will then take all of those recommendations and consider them in one go. And that's the only shot that this task force has for affecting change. And that's just really upsetting.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. Is there anyone else that'd like to make a comment? Okay, so I don't know why I feel really emotional about what you just said, Patrick. So at this point, I think that we've heard from Attorney Baldwin. I think that we understand your point of view. And I think we should move to the next item on the agenda, which is...
Is there anything you want to say in closing? I just want to give Jim
Me?
I know, thank you. I know this has been, I think it's really important for people to understand that what Alith alluded to, and Patrick, in your words, we're trying to work in collaboration in the spirit of making positive and productive change. And this has been a lot of sweat equity, and it's people's not only lifeblood, but personal passion. It's people's lives. So, that's some of the passion that we've heard tonight. And I just want to, echo that. Thank you, everybody, for speaking honestly and asking difficult questions. And Jim, thank you for coming. I don't know if you have anything to say before.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. I truly believe in the mission of the task force, and I believe that you're a terrific team and a passionate team and a committed team. And I look forward to your good work and the work product that the task force is charged with producing. I think that its creation was by virtue of the fact that the administration, Brenda and other members of the Board of Selectmen, recognized that this issue needs to be addressed. And this is the vehicle by which that board, the Board of Selectmen, decided to address it. And I thank you for your hard work, your tough questions, and I wish you all the best. And again, if I can assist in any way, I would be more than happy to meet again with the task force as a whole or with people individually to go over not your conclusions, not your issues, but questions you might have, because that's my role here. And I don't mean to make any personal comments or observations or attacks of other people for having opinions that may or may not align with my own, just as this task force feels the same with the diversity of opinions on its body and among the people in the town. So it's a difficult task. It's a daunting one, and I wish you the best. And thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Attorney.
Thanks,
Baldwin.
Jim.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
So Martin Luther King once said, "Anyone who starts out with the conviction that the road to racial justice is only one lane wide will inevitably create a traffic jam and make the journey infinitely longer." I think tonight on this call, I felt very much like there's a lane, and that this task force has been asked to stay in a lane. And the question stands, and it's been raised explicitly a number of times in this chat. Can we be an effective body within this lane?
And Gina, if I could echo that, it's really not, and I want people to be here because I see that there are people who may not fully understand why we're digging in on this one. I think it's important to make clear, and I think I speak for several members of the task force, this is not about our denial of one specific request. This is about an understanding that we have to get messy. We have to, you know, as my t-shirt says, you know, get into good trouble, disrupt some of the processes that exist, not accept what has been the status quo. So I would hate Attorney Baldwin's takeaway to be, and he's not here, but I would hate for anyone's takeaway to be that our reservations and being dubious about the plan forward or the path forward is that we're stuck because we were told we couldn't be in an interview room.
It isn't. And I also want to make that clear. And that's what I meant. I think the chat has been pretty clear about that, and that's why I asked the specific question of what are we supposed to ask every time? Because that, and I feel as though we, you know, that's the lane that we're in, that we have to always think that we don't have the autonomy to proceed without asking first, because the largest issue here is that there was not actually a question about this. You know, we thought that we were within the guidelines. There is obviously a disconnect between Attorney Baldwin's perception of what the mission statement is and some of the task force members. I don't want to speak for everybody. I can tell you, as someone who wrote the mission statement, those are actually my words. I actually did write the first draft of it, and the majority of it are my words. And I have a different understanding than Attorney Baldwin. So I can speak to that very specifically because I did write it. And so now we have to make a choice.
Gina, it's also important to point out that in the writing and in all the hours of back and forth, and this is really, and again, members of the public, this is like, you know, the part where the task force were just following up on the next, I guess it would be technically the next item agenda about our next steps.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, so, you know, we do have somewhat of a free format. So if you know, we should hear from the task force members first, but then we can go to members of the public. Gina and I did spend painstaking hours, and Gina's, you know, whole thing was, does this have teeth? Does this have teeth? And we were assured again and again that there was enough space in this. And Karen Wackerman pointed this out. I think the interpretation, there is enough room for us that we were feeling, I think Gina was more hesitant, but I think we were both encouraged that there was going to be space to really be able to to do some of the work and create change along the way. And in our process and in our inquiry, and that it wasn't just going to be a research exercise, that it wasn't just about observation, that there was an advocacy piece in the mission statement. There's reasons that we've spent time putting up media lists and speaking with Westport and going down roads with the CCM, et cetera. So I think that's the confusing part, because we really were assured that there was space in this mission statement to give it teeth. And so now I think we're left as a task force to figure out, based on a lot of the comments we've seen, you know, again, looking towards item 8, what are our next steps?
Can I say something?
Sure.
Can you guys hear? Can everybody hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Before
Jason.
there were some, I put on my headset. So this is Jason Sherrod speaking. I just want to touch on the last point. Like, I know that there's been a lot of painful conversations happening, that this was very painful. Nancy, I want to explicitly call you out and say thank you for being in front there and taking on a lot of the burden that probably that news article may have caused you, because, you know, you referenced hate mail before, and I would hate that that's coming away as a result of that article. So I just want to say thank you, and I empathize for you there. But listen, I think today was while painful, we have an opportunity and a better understanding to move forward. Where getting shot down, I don't know who really expected us to get into that process, but getting out there and engaging in this conversation, I think is going to have very positive outcomes. If it all just helps us navigate through things a little bit better. I think we heard that if we do have questions, we need to at least triangulate them and run them by Jim to see if they make sense and if we're approaching down the right path. And I also think this gives us a clear understanding of how to take our charge. We're hearing that as the mission statement is defined currently, that we may not have teeth as it's been stated. Well, we have up until the 22nd or even before that to make decisions. So I think we have opportunity to make some change and do some things. And everything that we learned over the last couple of days has been very positive. While painful, and while we might not have heard what we wanted to hear, I think that leaves a lot of opportunity for us moving forward. I don't know if everybody else heard that, but I hear opportunity. And that's all I wanted to say is it may have been discouraging, but I think there's some opportunity out of this.
Any?
You know, what is really heartening is to see the amount of people on the call. That means they're all wanting to be here because they're vested in this. I actually believe that we need to proceed. Change takes a very long time. And you inch, even that inch, you have to sweat for it. It's not that easy. I've been through, you know, all of us have our stories. And that's why we are so committed to this. We all know how difficult it is. This is not the point to give up. This is actually a point we acknowledge the tremendous mountain that we have to climb. And what do we have? We have a teaspoon. But we've got to make the best use of that teaspoon. Don't expect anyone to give you a jackhammer, because that's not what anybody is used to, and nobody shares power. But if we don't use that teaspoon to the best of our ability and make it a tablespoon and inch along that way, we have nothing to show for the next generation. If these people, if all of us can think of it, that this is the work we need to do to take the pain, the burden for that coming generation, then that's what we need to do. So I'm hoping that none of us resign, and none of us are doubly, triply committed, though it's been very painful to read that, you know, the personal attacks, and also to hear that about the first select woman. But this is what we heard in our deep listening. That is this commission really going, task force really going to be taken seriously? This is what I heard in my deep listening to everyone I spoke to. Because they quite categorically said, we don't think the town is committed to this. But we've got to at least do something. Let's not give up. Nancy and Gina and everybody on the team, let us not give up. Hard as it is going to be. And this is just the first vlog. This is just the tip of the iceberg. It's going to get a lot rougher from here, because we are actually challenging and making people aware that there's something wrong. And that's uncomfortable. That's really uncomfortable. So Gina, please stay on.
Thanks.
We need you.
Thank you, Annie. Karen?
Thank you, Annie. Fighting all of my urges to leave. right this second. The reality is, I think that the very first recommendation that I would have us put on a blueprint is the formation of a committee with some authority to get involved in the areas, or engage, according to our definition, in the areas of town that need a racial equity infusion, if you will. It's egregious to me that governing bodies in our town, like commissions, wouldn't say in this day and age, we should consult with the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force. So I feel that our current task force, with its current mission to deliver a blueprint, can deliver one that says there should be a different task force and or committee with these abilities and within this sort of jurisdiction. And I would say that should not wait till January 2022. I would say that should be delivered as soon as possible with that strong recommendation, so that we fulfill our obligation and our commitment and what we signed up for, but put our first select woman on the hook for honoring the spirit of this, which is to drive racial equity changes in this town. That is my strong conviction right now.
I second.
Yes, go ahead, Gina.
Yeah, but Alex, did you have your hand up?
Sorry.
I was just thinking about what Karen was saying. Sorry about that. So I think that up until, when was it? Friday, a lot of sweat equity, brains, care, love went into putting together a plan. I want to make sure that even in these disheartening moments, we don't veer from the plan. But I love the thought of adding new layers to the plan. So yeah, this morning, the thought of like, what's this all for, crossed my mind. But again, in the spirit of moving forward, I think of all the shoulders that I am standing on, that we are standing on, who have faced more pain, more disappointment, more deception than I could ever imagine. So no, yeah, it hurts, but we soldier on for all of those who did the work before us too. So we have an awesome plan. I would say let's stick with it. And if there are any awesome new additions to our plan, I'm with it.
Thank you, Alex. Doug, as soon as I'm going to get through the whole committee, but I see a lot of hands up and I really want to hear from the community because I just do.
I'll be really brief. Just Annie is very touched by what you said. Thank you for that. And I actually think we've kicked around this idea of, we have the guardrails they've established for the committee, but I think we push them and challenge them, and that we look to deliver a blueprint well before January 2022. And the blueprint's probably got 4 or 5 pretty clear asks or recommendations, one of which would be a permanent commission, full revision of this mission statement that's so constraining, and a couple other, pretty clear ones, and force the issue. And it doesn't have to be that we quit or we walk away from it. I'm committed to staying with it, but I think we need to force the issue. I'm not comfortable waiting, playing by the rules as they've been established till 2022, and then just delivering a blueprint that can be tabled or just ignored for, we have no control over. So.
Thanks, Doug. Steve?
I'm good.
Steve, you good? John Whaley. I think that, anybody else on the committee? Sandra? Anyone else? Okay. John Whaley.
Wow, holy moly, 3 hours and 5 minutes. And I've heard a lot. I think as a teacher in town, it was both, hope inducing to watch 50 people stay on and care enough about this issue for you to stick around, but it was also a bit disconcerting at how language was often by design meant to obfuscate and be oblique in order for the sort of status quo to remain the status quo. And that's going to keep happening, I guess, is my point here. The fact that he kept even referring to you guys as the task force, there was something to that. Like, you guys are just the task force. You're not a town committee. You're not, a political body in any way, shape, or form. So there's something about that. So I just have a comment and maybe a recommendation. In regards to what Innie was saying, first of all, everybody loves you, Innie, more than anything. I keep getting texts on the side saying, like, I wish Innie was my family member. So keep being awesome. The direction is more important than the speed. So if you guys are going to remain a town entity, staying the course is going to be a slow slog at every possible signpost. They're going to try and slow you down at doing the good work that you're trying to do. So if you know that, then, you just buckle in and you kind of grit your teeth and keep slogging. Plans can be revised. Somebody spoke about plans before, and you stick to the plan, but plans can be revised. And they're like, every single plan, if it's too planned, the plan, crumbles to dust. So it has to be malleable in some way. So if things need to be revised, please keep that in mind. But I think the last point that I want to make, and this is where I think we get into trouble sometimes, is that, like, our lack of imagination sometimes is bewildering to me. Like, one of the things that we supposedly want all of our students to graduate with is the ability to critically think. I think we teach kids to think about things. I think we teach kids to think a lot about things, but I'm not sure if we get kids to question things all that much. And I'm wondering how much critical thinking is going into this. If Audre Lorde says the master's tools can't dismantle the master's house, the political process here might not be the method through which we make the changes that need to be made. I think the civic engagement, like the guy said, if the task force is constrained, there's rules and regulations and processes that will keep you guys on that path, like Gina talked about. Okay, then we need civic engagement. We need the people to be involved on this way more, just like you see the 50 people here right now and saying, okay, fine, task force, 11 people. This is what we want as the people. I think we need to get people loud. We need to get people at every one of these meetings as much as possible. Cupchick needs to be on the tip of everyone's tongue to let them know that this is what we want as the people. Because if this just turns into just another sort of spinning our wheels political endeavor, they're going to use the system against us. And that's not going to be good for us. So that's my point. And thank you so much for letting me speak. I appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Dan, yeah.
If I could just echo what John was saying, because I was actually going to say something similar. Also, I just feel like, don't underestimate the power of small businesses in this town. The small businesses have so much to do with the decision-making process of what goes on in town. And once we're able to figure out the way to move forward and restructure, whether it's the mission statement or restructure, whatever we're doing, I think we need to figure out how to tap into getting the small business owners involved. They have a lot more say than we think in what decisions are made by our town. And we support them. So why not do an outreach to them?
Dan, is your hand still up from before, or Dan Iacobello?
No, this is a new.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Gina. Well, similar to what a lot of people have said, Innie and others, yeah, I never think it makes sense to give in to discouragement on something this important. I know it comes up, those feelings of discouragement, and one of the things I do is help to build permanent supportive housing for the homeless. And when I talk to new nonprofits doing the work, I tell them you have to go into this expecting to hear no a lot. You just have to go into it expecting that. And it's all about being persistent and overcoming it, but go into it with that expectation because it is important and it is challenging. And I guess I just had a question because I don't know enough about the technical aspects. I know that the task force is charged with putting out this blueprint, by January 22nd, but is there anything that prevents the task force from putting out draft portions of the blueprint in advance that can be made public, right? So that there can be a chapter that speaks to issues like this, and that is released, right, for people to comment on and give feedback on? Or is there a constraint to say you can only release it in January and you give us the full report? Because I think maybe that's the way to get this out and engage people in the community, is to start releasing it. Now that does open the task force up to comment and criticism, I realize, but I think that that's one way to maybe affect change, is by putting the ideas out there publicly in advance of January, or whenever the final blueprint is put together. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. I think I understood from Attorney Baldwin that they want one blueprint from us. They don't, it was actually specifically said they don't want to hear from us piecemeal. They want one statement.
But we have the task force has a website and thing, and it's public. And isn't there something that, we're allowed to post anything we want? I mean, not inflammatory stuff, but anything is allowed to be made public. And can the task force say this things that are being considered as recommendations, and members of the press and the media can see those things? And
yeah, I mean, I think Tim says, I think Jim B's point was clear, that the product for the task force was for the Board of Selectmen, not the public. That's what I heard tonight. Michelle? Sorry, Dan, were you done?
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Sorry. Michelle?
Thank you, Gina. I just first want to say thank you for letting me speak and to commend this task force. I've been on a lot of task forces and committees. I've only had the pleasure of sitting in, this is my second meeting of sitting in, and I've never seen a group of people get more done in a shorter period of time than you have. And I think that what has just happened with the discussion over the police chief shows your power. Do you know how many conversations like this happen in rooms and nobody ever hears about it? Nobody ever knows. You're already influencing the ways that people are thinking in our town. And so I thank you so much, because I know the work is so hard and painful and can be discouraging. I think I want to echo what others have said about engaging the public. There's so many of us out here who want to help and want to be your champions outside of the work you're doing in your task force meetings. We're here to be mobilized. We're here to get the word out. And certainly, we can be doing some of the work that needs to be done. But I would also say you're a task force. That means they're on the hook, whether they like it or not. And I'm not saying this to be even, a jerk about it. I'm saying this as, they have formally expressed that they are committed to understanding where Fairfield is on this issue and doing something about it. And the door is open and you're in it. You're there. And so they're committed, whether they really are or not. The fact of the matter is that you can turn and point to your existence, to your mission, and say, no, we're here. You wanted us to be here and now we are. And this is the results of that. And it gives you the right to comment on what they do. And it gives you the right to at least ask to be inserted in the process. So I say kudos, and so happy to do whatever it is to help all of you in this important work, and all of us as Fairfield residents.
Thank you, Michelle. Linda McDonald.
Hi, this is my first meeting, and I have to say the same thing that Michelle. The task force really is impressive, and I'm happy to join today and plan to do so in the future. And I just, by sitting and watching and deeply listening, have to say that as an outsider looking in, this town can't thrive going forward without having a racial equality task force or a racial equality in general. And the lawyer on tonight and Kupchik, they know that. That's why they asked you to do this. And this is such a hot topic, and they know they have a problem with what happened at McKinley. It's in our schools, whether it's systemic or not, who knows, but it's something that's just in our world, unfortunately. And this is just something that every town needs, and especially in Fairfield County, for the next generation, for people who live here. It's an important thing. And I think at the end, watching Jim's body language, I think the last 20 minutes, he changed from being on the defensive to really listening and kind of feeling a part of your team, and maybe going back and giving different information to whoever he's going to deliver it to, and kind of having an understanding for more of what you're about. And I don't think it's a bad thing to maybe, you may have lost this fight, but I think it might be a good idea to go to the police force or Kupchik or whoever you would go to, because I'm not quite sure who it is, and say, all right, we didn't get to be in on this, but let's circle back and figure out how we change it for the future. And you asked us to do this, so how do we make it so it's right next time? And how do we do it correctly next time? And get them to say what they want instead of you telling them, like, this is what we're going to do. So go through the process, go through the letters, whatever it is, and you call a meeting to them and say, how do we make this right for the future? And see what they say. Call Kupchik out. She's the one that did the interviews. Call her out on them. I mean, you deserve that, right? So that's just from somebody looking in, because you guys deserve the voice. They want your voice. So ask for it.
Thank you so much. Trey from Fairfield Ubuntu.
Hey, thank you, Gina. I commend you all for the work that you've put into this task force and the findings that you delivered and shared with folks. But I have to say that, setbacks are part of the journey. Fairfield Ubuntu has been an anti-racism group for about a year and a half now, and we've certainly experienced some setbacks. But I'm reminded by the work of many civil rights leaders. Nelson Mandela, I'm a native of South Africa, in understanding that the journey to, so to speak, a better social experience, more equitable social experience, typically is long. But it also requires a sense of creativity and audacity and a stubbornness, yeah? And I think that right now, what I heard in the course of tonight's 3 hours is opportunities to be a bit more creative, and that you can expect for the system to allow you essentially to succeed, right? And how do we then kind of operate outside of that, while we also kind of, I think when you're operating from within, you're supposed to, learn the ways of the system in order for that to inform your movement going forward. I don't know that it would ever turn around and kind of like support efforts of equity, because there's huge stakes here, right? So for me, at least, we are here as Yabantu, and we are, I think, a group that understands that well and are committed, so to speak, to work and operate outside of the belly of the beast, is what I would call it, in order to affect certain changes that the restraints that they have in place will not be bestowed upon us. So I hope you guys know that there are other groups, there are groups out there that are, I think, ready and committed, so to speak, to make noise and movements that perhaps you are restricted from doing. But I also think, just real quick, last point here, tactics are important, and studying, so to speak, your tactic before you strike is really, really, really important. So kudos, and I'm re-energized once more.
Thank you for that, Trey. Is there anyone else that wants to make a comment? So I just have to say, for me, the fact that there are still 44 people on this call 3.5 hours in is so surprising to me, because we've been operating in this silo of 11, or probably 15, because we have some really dedicated people who show up every week. And, you know, I think the feedback that this letter had for me was, this is not something that this town is interested in. And I am very heartened that so many of you stayed on the call and are participating and willing to participate in the process. In a way that I really did not anticipate at all. I think I came to tonight feeling very responsible for our role as representatives of this community, and feeling that it's our job to make sure that we're speaking for you. And I came into this call extraordinarily concerned that we will not be able to do that. And very concerned that we were not responding to what we heard on that call on the very first town forum, which is this task force cannot do anything. That is ultimately always my concern. I don't want to be a figure in a tick box exercise. I feel accountable, very accountable to this community. And to that end, I just want to thank you all for showing your needs, because ultimately that is what this task force has been established to do. I am extraordinarily proud of this task force. The people that we've been working with, after our last meeting, I walked away thinking, this is a fantastic group. We have deep talent in this group. You have only seen the surface of what this group can do. And then felt really disheartened after. But I do thank you all for both the community and the task force for showing up for justice and equity, because ultimately we cannot allow other people to define what equity means to us. It is really important for those of us who believe in equity and who are passionate about equity to make sure that we push the narrative forward in whatever capacity that we can. And I'm very moved by everything that I've heard for the last hour. It's actually, you've given me a lot to think about, and I do think, you know, there's got to be some creativity, but I didn't know that there were so many of you. So thank you. Keep showing up. Nancy, do you have anything?
Ooh, so many things. I can't tell if it's the 4 hours I've been on the phone or if it's just all of it. So
Girl, I'm with you on that. It's a bit hard.
With you. We're not going to start. We're not going to start.
I'm not allowed to say I'm feeling all the feels, but that's what's happening. I feel I need to both say thank you. I want to call out Ryan Odenak in particular for being a stealth stenographer and note taker. I forced you into it tonight, and you're my hero for that, and for so many other reasons. And Gina, what you just said is so beautiful. I mean, I think some of what I'm feeling so emotional about is I've made this new friendship with Gina, who, and that weight of the responsibility feels so intense. And she's been a very patient guide, and I have to apologize because I think I cut you off tonight several times, and I tried to sit on my hands, and I'm very bad at that, and I'm a talker, and it's no excuse, but I cut off a few of you, and I hope you know it comes from a place of it comes from a passionate place, and Gina, particularly to you, if I cut you off and I didn't mean it to come off dismissive in any way, because everything you say has been a lesson to me and a gift, and I value that. So yes, thank you. I would move to our item 8 is to hear, consider, and act on the next steps. I would move this to a date certain at our next meeting, because I think there is so much to digest here. Maybe it means we need to call a special meeting of this group for a few days from now, but I think there's so much to process. I haven't even looked through all the chats, and I know there's like a lot really good here. I would hate to make a decision based on all of this emotion and input and some of the input that I haven't even had a chance to read. So I am going to make a motion to move item number 8 to hear, consider, and act on Racial Equity and Justice Task Force next steps to a date certain, which is our next meeting date.
Second the motion.
Is there discussion on it?
I'm tired.
Yeah. I would say all in favor.
Well, can we pick a date?
It's the date certain, the next meeting.
Yeah, but yeah, okay.
The date is, I just don't have does anyone have the calendar in front of them? I'm sorry, I don't.
Do we want to do that, or you said maybe call a special meeting?
Yeah, that's what I'm after.
I guess we could pick if the task force.
Our next meeting is February 2nd.
The reason why it's important, Nancy, is our next steps, our timeline will be altered based on our next steps.
Okay.
And I'm afraid, I mean, not that I certainly can rip up a timeline and write a new one. You know, Alex and I worked on the timeline. We can do that again, but I don't know if we want to kick it into February.
I think we can. I'm just going to say, because Jim said whatever moves the thing forward effectively. So a date certain, Thursday, January 28th.
Yes. Second.
Okay, so my motion is the date certain, and it's January 28th. I think Steve had seconded. We can, Steve, and then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay.
I was an aye.
Abstention. Okay, so we can agree that next we'll call for a special meeting next Thursday to discuss next steps. I hope whoever is here will pass it on and say that. We also have a remaining outstanding item, which I also would like to table, but maybe it's timely. So Gina,
I mean, I actually don't want to give that short shrift, because I think that there are two really important pieces that need to be discussed there. One, which is the actual incident, and two, it's the response from the high school and the students in this community, which I think needs to be celebrated. And I don't want to do it in a short way. I want to give it the gravity that it deserves. So I'd also like to table that to the next time.
The special meeting, or to the one after.
Let's do it at the special meeting. We'll start up, because it'll be a nice place to start.
One of the reasons I think that's important, Gina, is because you know, it's this idea that you know, other efforts in town are actually doing things. And so I think it actually partners very well with the handcuffs that we feel that we're in, because there's so much we could say, wouldn't it be great if? And so I think those two things are quite linked. So.
Great. So I make a motion then to table item number 4 to a date certain of Thursday, the 28th. Is there?
Second the motion.
Alex seconded it. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any nays? I'm certain I have that in the wrong order. Thank you all. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'm going to make a motion to adjourn. Who wants to second that?
Gina motions to adjourn. Is there any second? Sandra is seconded. Any discussion on that?
There's still a hand up. I'm sorry. There is a little hand up. I don't know if it's.
Oh, Michelle, is your hand actually up, or is that from before?
I don't know.
Oh, it's from before.
Yeah, sometimes they're hard to get down.
I didn't know. I wanted to make sure.
Once again, I thank you all. I cannot believe so many of you stayed on for
Nancy.
3.5 hours.
All in favor?
Ryan, yes, did you have something?
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead with that. Just Nancy, can you just stay on?
Yeah. I'm going to, because I'm going to
Fight
download the chat.
logistics with you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All in favor to adjourn? Do we do that?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Good night, everybody.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for
Thank you.
being here, all of you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Night.
Again, Dan.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, we will. Karen,
All right.
down to Karen.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so Nancy, if you go to your chat,
Yeah.
if you go to the chat window, in where you could type, there are 3 little dots.
Yep.
They save chat.
Oh, yeah.
So you want to hit save chat.
That's saved.
That's
And
what
then-
I was gonna
Yeah,
ask.
there's a folder. Nice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share it to a Google Drive.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna say, Nancy.
Okay,
Could
good.
you
All
please
right.
save the chat for me? Yeah.
I don't know where it went. It just said it's
I don't know the difference between save chat and the file icon, but do them both.
Yeah, I've done this before and then I haven't been able to find the chat that I saved. Dropbox, Google Box, Microsoft, your computer. Okay, let's see. But nothing comes up.
I'm gonna see on my computer.
Let's see if it downloaded.
Karen, thank you for your little text. It's
I think it's going to be fine. I just know that I talked to her very briefly.
Yeah.
Are you still recording?
Wait, let me stop it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.